Hey guys, this is a reminder we have a new podcast at Merkle Media called Free the Rabbits, hosted by Joel Thomas. This podcast is available on YouTube, Rumble, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Free the Rabbits, hosted by Joel Thomas. Go check it out right after this episode. Welcome to the show, everybody. You're listening to the Confessionals podcast. I'm your host, Tony Merkel. Thanks for being here. If you have a crazy, wild experience you want to share with me on the show, go ahead and shoot me an email. My email address is contact@theconfessionalspodcast.com. That's contact@theconfessionalspodcast.com. Or go to the website, The Confessionals Podcast, hit the contact section, and you can reach me that way as well. Either works for me. Just get a hold of me. If you want more shows on a weekly basis, every week we drop member shows for members on the website and on YouTube on Thursdays. If you want access to that content, all you got to do is become a member to theconfessionalspodcast.com, or if you watch on YouTube, just become a member on YouTube. It's the same content, just two different locations. We're trying to make it convenient for you guys, and I try to make sure that it's not confusing either. So it's the same content, just two different options for locations to land on. Also, friends, go ahead and check out merkmerch.com. You see me wearing one of my shirts right now. You're going to see more of that moving forward. We just launched our own Merkle Media apparel line. And so what we're trying to do, the plan here is to move away from advertising eventually and just sponsor ourselves. In order for us to do that, you guys as the listeners just need to rep the show and wear our swag. So merkmerch.com, get your Merkle Media apparel, more shirts, more hats, more everything is going to come there once we burn through the stock that we have in a warehouse in Texas right now. So go ahead, check that out, merkmerch.com. And last but not least, check out our documentaries, merklefilms.com. That's where we house all our documentaries. Purchase them on demand. Expedition Dogman, The Shape of Shadows, and our new release, Sasquatch and the Missing Man, is now available at merklefilms.com. Go ahead right now, stream it on demand. You can buy it or rent it. Either way works for me. Just go ahead and check it out at merklefilms.com. All right. Today, we got an awesome show. And listen, Nathan, thanks for being here. We are joined by Nathan Reynolds, everybody. And this is very just interesting how this kind of came together. Because I was about to start telling you before we started recording, like, I just got to wait. Because I want the people to know, because I do read the comments sometimes. I told you, I had just come out with an episode with a woman who had been to Epstein Island. And I told you the circus around that episode. But I went to Spotify, my dashboard on Spotify, and I have a recurring question that just pops up to my Spotify listeners every week. And it's like, who do you want to see on the show? And there's just a list of people that I have that people want to have on the show. Some people I'm like, I don't want that person on the show. But there's other people I'm like, I'd like to have that person on the show. And they never get back to me. And then your name came up and I'm like, I've never heard of that person before. And I looked you up and I was just kind of looking around and I'm like, he does farming. Like I was thinking, I've done like survival shows where it's like living off grid kind of thing. I haven't done one in a while. Maybe I can do that. And then I see that you had on your YouTube channel, I think there was some kind of connection to Billy from Permapasture Farms and his son William, permaculture consultant.
Yes.
I think maybe you suggest their channels.
Oh yeah, man.
Right?
All the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And so I think on the bottom I saw like, they know him. So I text William and I said, hey, do you know Nathan? He's like, oh yeah, he's a great guy and stuff. I was like, I'm going to email him. And so I was like, okay, so there's a common person that we know because William's been on the show before. I've been on their stuff. And then I started seeing this Illuminati stuff and I'm like, maybe this is why, right? Yeah. And then you just informed me more that I didn't know about, like this whole military side of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was like, holy crap. So you have a deep bag. Mm-hmm. And I'm very interested to hear your story and how this all kind of came together for you. Mm-hmm. Shout out to William, by the way, because he's coming up this week and he's going to be processing my pigs for me. So I'll be learning how to process my pigs this week, which I'm very excited about. So that said, we're going to do an overtime show. So the first half, what we're going to do is going to focus on your family history, your childhood up into, I guess, adult life. And we're going to let you kind of steer the ship. but kind of getting your story out there in as full context as possible. Like I told you before, there is no handcuffs and there's no handcuffs on time. So feel free to just talk and share. And then we'll migrate into more of your military experience because it kind of goes hand in hand from what I understand. But you started sharing some things with me about feral people and creatures being created and kill teams and all this stuff. And I'm just like, what in the world did I get myself into? I'm just super excited. So with that said, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
really.
Man.
Absolutely.
So you come from a family that I've seen described online. I don't know if you describe it this way, but you come from a family that people have described it as Illuminati family. Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a lot of people are borrowing into. No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human. In the same way, they believe they are something other than, and that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. It's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists.
Yeah.
Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to,
Interesting. All right. So I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. What they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is.
Yeah?
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily... my blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff. And I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, And that was brutal. Because then there's this... I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, and it helped me to see that maybe I wasn't anathema, that maybe just because I have this seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not living our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, and that's what he offers to everyone. Wow. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families.
That's wild. I didn't. Last year in the Christmas season, I took the last 2 weeks of the year off, and I had other people host the show. And my friend Joel did an episode that he called "Good Nephilim," and he kind of goes into this idea of Nephilim being able to be redeemed.
Yeah,
and it's a concept that I feel like has not been tapped into a whole lot. And he did on my show for I think the first time. And since then he's kind of uncovered more information to back up his claims. But having, a real life Nephilim here, not just kidding. But it's just, it kind of goes into that concept, Yeah. And so that's why I asked you, because I was like, hold on, like that's pretty wild. Like, to be like, have I ever encountered somebody who comes from that bloodline? Maybe. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but how many times do you come across somebody that does come from that bloodline and acknowledges it, knows it? That's another thing. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of hit on the childhood stuff right there in that kind of description. Was it something that came from complete childhood, where it's like from your earliest memories it's just been kind of manipulated and jacked up? And what was that like for you growing up?
Well, my family set up a base of operations. They're from the East Coast, the Reynolds family on one side. My mother's family, just for clarity, I've never exposed a lot of the side of things that were going on with, let me say it another way. The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. Like my great-grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia. And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account, because it's who can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family, is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and they would make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel, that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. That was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland. And they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of the Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child abuse. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modifications purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was, died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
Wow. How long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody that they want you to do. And this happens by taking you away from your mom and your dad constantly and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts, right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who were abusing children, and they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance, and then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children, and I would slice their throats up, man. I would tear them to freaking ribbons. And I loved it because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your face is smashed in. Like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, like fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. So we would move around constantly. My parents would move us around every sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. And now my sisters on the other side, they weren't roped into this thing. I was in a male cult. This is the Brotherhood of the Snake down in Lake Havasu. But this is, my sisters weren't caught up in the same thing, but they were caught up by the family as a whole. And so this carried on, and we moved into this place called Sholo Pinetop Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation was 100 yards from my door. And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out, but I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it.
Well, so, all right, seeing things like that, like you say, all right, so you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally
not
change.
be the people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing. It's because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaskizmadzotoi in the Greek in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic, and all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I've physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body. And this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You got billionaires today who admit it on Joe Rogan podcasts and other places, where they're like, yeah, I use the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand. This is a religion, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself. And so these watchers will give people this power. Their priest class will dispense that to people who want to go into, like what I come from down there in the Apache reservation, was the people that slip between realms and become animals, and it's
You are hitting things that are confirming so many things that like I speak hypothetically about, almost in the sense that like I believe, but I can't prove, kind of thing. Um, but like for instance, years ago, I had a guy on the show, and he didn't say it on the show, so I usually don't say his name because some people know who I'm talking about, some people don't. But because he didn't say it on the show, I don't know why he didn't say it on the show. But he said that he was a former, I guess I forget, like Satanist or whatever. Like he came from a deep line of this stuff, and he said at one point, he says at one point people have to make a decision whether they're going to go the vampire route or the werewolf route. And he said that he was told by somebody who went the werewolf route that he should go vampire because doing werewolf is like the most painful thing you'll ever experience in your entire life. I don't know. I can't say factually how true that is or not, but you're saying a lot of similar things, and now you're saying that there's traversing realms involved with this. So are you saying that there are people who are traversing realms because of their ability to change into these things, or are those two separate categories? Or sometimes the same?
I would say it like this. The reason that there's these First Nation people have preserved these priest class, right? Just all across the world. This isn't just like localized to white European people. There are people here who practice this type of same old religion, and they call them skinwalkers. That's a name for them, right? But these witches and warlocks that practice these things, they go and rob graves, and they take the infants' bones out and they grind them into powders, and they use that as poisons, like that. So the Jesuits was this like massive assassination team training group that was operating there that started training me. Well, then it was like you needed to learn this spiritual side of assassination and hunting and stalking. And that's where the skinwalkers and the Navajo and the Dene are like they have a different priest class that does that. And so that's what I got put out there for, because they do stuff like slipping between realms. We call them shadow walkers in the industry. Like these are guys that have this means to go between spaces. And so where you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't detect them. They're not on thermal, but there's certain types of ways that you can detect them. So it's like you have to get kind of raised up into these arts. And these are like, this is why we call it like, this is to me the realm of Azazel. I'm just convinced that this is all Azazel's kingdom in that realm, on that side of it. And people are just branching off of his tree of knowledge of good and evil side of it, and he's ultimately the one that was teaching men these ways of war in that sense of it. But like, just like with what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, man, they cursed him with lycanthropy. Daniel warns him, hey, don't go down that road. You got a dream from the Most High, don't do it. And he did it anyway. He said the watchers are going to curse you. And that's literally what they did, man. They cursed him and made him a beast. They took him down the lycanthropy road, because that's what they do, man. His hair grew out, his nails grew out. Like he became a different thing that if you and I spotted it on camera, we would say it's a cryptid. We would call these things cryptids because we don't have a proper working knowledge of history and understanding why people called these things these names. But the vampire side of the equation, they tend to be much more human masquerading, whereas you get much more feral production when people start to take this other route of becoming a beast. That's kind of the options that they give people in that world. But I believe a lot of the guys that you see out there or who are experiencing these things, they're loose assets for families. Like these are guard dogs on estates. Like that's literally, there was a training program I had to go to when I was 9 years old, and we'd go up to this farm in Michigan that was in the family, my dad's cousin, and they train all of these police, military, law enforcement, and VIP protection dogs, but then they have other cages that are man-sized cages for other stuff because that gets brought in by the families, and it's like some of these are people that are just beasts, like physically people that are like not like the rest of us, strength-wise, speed-wise, power-wise, intelligence-wise, and then others of them are just unrecognizable as anything related to man. And so
is that their ability, the strength, intelligence, is that something that is brought on through ritual, or is it brought on through like medical injections? I've heard stories of military injecting people with things, and they essentially become a super soldier. Is it that kind of stuff, or a combination, or what?
I think it's just both. It depends on who's got high tech and who's got the old tech. And the old tech is generally superior. The new tech has side effects. when people are getting injections and are using, recombinant DNA to start augmenting stuff, there's other variables that are unpredictable, whereas if you just use a different spirit, you can predict what it's going to be. That's like when a skinwalker kills, that's what you have to go through, man. I'm 9 years old and I had to stink and kill somebody with my hands, a friend, a person that I love, because my family was not somebody I loved. And so part of in order to be inhabited by these spirits that will shapeshift you and allow you to become a different creature, you're going to kill somebody that you love, and you're going to kill them with your bare hands. And you're going to breathe in their life as they die.
Mm.
And it's when you do that this stuff comes on you, and that's the stuff that makes you convinced you can never be redeemed.
I believe it. So all right, there's so much to unpack. I'm trying to collect my thoughts. Let's just go with the assassin route. You were a kid being trained to do that. When you were doing it, did you have to transform? Was that part of the process for you, or did you ever have to never go down that route?
I wasn't I didn't go that route. My route was being able to get by anything. Like, you got to be able to invade anything and be able to familiarize yourself and be understanding of how to navigate and get past people's weaknesses or things' weaknesses. Like, you want to train how to do infiltration and exfiltration with targets, hardened targets. You're going to have to learn how to get by guard dogs, physical guard dogs, wolf kind, and then you're going to have to learn how to get by stuff that's like, they have a warlock that sits in this estate and they do ritual magic to do all these spells and incantations. You need to know how to get through that. So there's you get training by getting exposed to all these different variables so that you can be able to pierce through no matter what it is and eliminate somebody or plant something. It wasn't always just like assassination. That was an aspect of it, but a lot of it is counter-espionage and espionage. You're setting people up, right? Or you're trying to extract something. Like, there's this project we'll have to get into more. It's called the Jason Project, which is a secret scientific military group that's now more publicly known. It's a consulting group for the smartest people in the entire world, but they had children. And so they started this junior Jason program where they're like, yeah, we should all breed together, and have these really super high intelligent children. Well, then they could be great spies. And so that's where you get into espionage as a major tacit of this. That is, they get interlocked so heavily, and you start to figure out that the vast majority of the people behind the scenes are not just connected to these religious orders, they're connected to the government. And a lot of them are State Department employees. And this is how the United States military and government regulates and controls assets out of containment. People that are not doing what they're supposed to, that have information they shouldn't have, and they need to be eliminated, or you need to extract a piece of information from them. And so that's what really launched me into that realm, was right then in those mountains of the White Mountains is what they're called. But that was when I chose more of, I don't want anything. I want to not be in this cult side. It's not like that was respected, but it was acknowledged. And I got opportunities to do the side of it that I thought was high speed and low drag and looked way more freeing, which was the modern American soldier. I wanted that route. But you're designed to basically always be a spy, and that you're going to feed back the family what you want. And if you're going to be put in a position, we'll open the doors for you. And that's where all of that really was birthed out of, was there in the White Mountains. And then once that decision was made, my great-grandfather was brought back to our house in Colorado. He was located there, and my father signed me over to him. He got parental rights. He got bedtime rights with me at night.
That's sick.
For a few years, until he was too sick to do anything about it. And my dad got access to the trust fund. And that was when everything went from surface level, poor, middle class American to planes, new cars, new car, houses, bed and breakfasts. My family became wealthy, and I got thrown from freak show level werewolf Psychoville down in Arizona into the big city of Colorado Springs, which was military gods. Military, it is the capital of the New World Order. It's Denver, the Front Range of Colorado, is 100% the place where the capital has been built and the infrastructure was laid. And so I got put into the military side of the projects there when I was a young teen. And that's where NORAD Space Command and all of this underground facility from the United States Air Force Academy. And that's where I went into the military side of the equation. And that's where I stayed for quite a few years.
That's wild. I had a guy on the show a while ago. I don't want to rehash the story. I don't even remember what episode it was called or what I called it. I think it was a member show, but he was messing with something in his apartment, and somebody called in terroristic threats on him. And he had all this like powder and stuff. Like he wasn't making bomb. I don't think he was making bombs, but like, anyways, the SWAT team came and raided his home or his apartment, and his brother called me. He's like, dude, why is a SWAT team at your apartment right now? And he's at work. And so he just panicked and he fled. Oh gosh. And he this is in Colorado. He fled into the woods, and this is where the story for the show came up, because he's out in the woods and all of a sudden he's being hunted by translucent people shooting at him. And he said this lasted the entire night until he wound up getting to like a safe zone where it just kind of stopped. And he wound up turning himself in and cleared his name and everything. And I don't know, like I don't think he spent any time in jail because he wasn't building bombs, but he panicked. Like he's the kind of guy, like if I remember correctly, he's a bug out guy kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And so
it's happening. It's going down.
It's going down.
We're heading to the hills.
We out, like I've been training for this,
right. He's heading to the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but that he said that was, if not on the NORAD property, it was right near it.
Shine Mountain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we theorized that he might have even just stumbled into a training exercise.
That's what you could call it.
Yeah.
That's a fun word.
So in other words, it was training, like, oh, here's an easy target.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is it's almost like you're confirming that there is a lot of high level stuff happening there. Yeah. That would be almost sci-fi to ordinary people.
That's where Nikola Tesla set up his entire laboratory system.
Is that
Same
right?
place. Oh yeah.
Wow.
This is a high place. So like you got to understand there's cardinal points across the earth, and you are well aware of this, but there's cardinal points where the veil is thin. It's like a real thing. It's not like some kind of like it's a reality. It's like a physical, scientifically documentable event that takes place in some of these places. And that's why he chose that spot. That's why people, if you start to go to this place called Garden of the Gods, it's this gigantic sandstone feature that just sticks up at the base of 14,110 foot Pikes Peak, this massive mountain. That's where Colorado Springs sits. And then it's a confluence of all these springs, these incredible hot, well, mostly cool water, but mineral rich springs called Manitou Springs. That's where I ended up going to high school. And it's the highest concentrations of witches in the United States per capita occupy that area because it's a gigantic tunnel system that has been there from before the days of old, always been there. People have been there and they've been doing these kinds of participatory acts. Well, the United States military moved into there on a huge degree in the 1940s and began to build during the Cold War, they began to build a lot of tunnel systems. And this is where the continuity of government operations headquarters was going to be when it came to the central part of the United States. And so that Denver is ideally situated because you have the Great Plains to the east, and you have these gigantic cascades of mountains, the Rocky Mountains, as a shield behind you. And so that's why the continuity of government, if it ever relocates from the East Coast, it will go there. And that's where the base of major military operations has embedded itself. And so when somebody stumbles onto something that might be a training, like you call it, like these are just basic kit that a lot of our soldiers have that's just not on the TV yet, where soldiers are needing to be stealth technology, or they're rubbing thermal creams on themselves to hide from any type of thermal imaging software. This is like low end of the tech side of the equation. But Fort Carson, which is where I was stationed, that is a massive military base. And that's where, but abreast to that, there's 6 military bases surrounding Colorado Springs. So it is a gigantic ring of this, including deep underground military bases and stuff that goes up to Denver, and that's interlocked all the way up to Wyoming, where all the communications cables are for the entire country meet. So it's a really big area for all of that. And then you have all of this spiritual side of stuff that starts in the mountains, in particular in the Front Range and Rampart Range Road. So like my family ended up moving into this little town just outside of Colorado Springs, and like giant 5-pointed star, cardinal point, where everyone gathers on the high days, all the witch crap, right? All that stuff goes on in there, and that's embraced out there culturally. It's like the norm, and it's like normal that your children are part of this stuff. And so it's good to raise children in sick families in that environment. And so that's what that hub caters to. Whereas Colorado Springs on the other side is focused on the family, and it's like die-hard Christian side, and it's like, yeah, but all the creepy occultist people are on that side in Manitou Springs. We keep them over there where they have their coffin races and all the rest of it,
Wow. So we're gonna do an overtime with you. We're gonna focus heavy on the military experience, but I'm assuming the answer, and it's just a yes or no. You don't need to go into detail. Have you ever been in an deep underground base?
Yes,
of course you have. I figured you have, and it's probably not once. So, I definitely want to get into that for the overtime for sure. I want to kind of backtrack a bit to a couple things. One, you mentioned about people transforming their bodies, and that lichen is definitely that route. We've had people on the show, lots of people who have encountered these dog man type creatures. The one that comes to mind is episode 335. Kyle was the groundbreaking episode for me going into the dog man topic. I've had it before, but this was just like, whoa. Long story short, he's 15 years old, hunting with his grandfather in Kentucky, Daniel Boone National Forest, the upper side of it. And it's middle of the night. His grandfather's in the truck because he was older, so they had radios. The dogs get on a scent. You hear him howling. He comes up on the scene, and he can hear his dogs fighting with coyotes. The coyotes go off. He only had 2 dogs out there. And in that fight, he heard his younger dog run off as well. So now the older dog, who's a really good hunter, really strong dog, is by himself, fights off these coyotes. They come back in, and it sounded like they came back in a pack almost, and started whooping up on his hound dog. I think it's a hound dog. Don't hold me to that, but hunting dog. And then he hears his other dog come back in, and when his other dog came back in, the fight changes. Coyotes are gone. He comes onto the scene. His older dog goes back to treeing the raccoon in the tree. He comes over, pats him on the head, and he hears his younger dog behind the tree chowing down on a coyote. He goes around the tree, and it's not the younger dog. The younger dog never came back. This was a very large dog on all 4. He said it was so big that it was holding a coyote by the rib cage in its mouth. And he said that when he came up on it, it looked at him and it stood up on its hind legs, took chase. That it unfolds a whole scene where basically his hunting dog saved his life. His hunting dog did survive, but barely. And he thought his dog had died at some point. That story that he shared on the show, is there any way outside of what you shared that it could be something else other than somebody that transformed from human to upright walking dog, that maybe was one of those people who weren't able to handle that and could never change back? Is that in your mind what that would be? Or do you think that there are actual creatures out there that maybe come from other realms, or maybe just like some people? I don't personally subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot's just this hairy primate that we can't catch.
Yeah.
I think there's more woo-woo stuff to it. Do you think it's along those lines? What are your thoughts on that side of stuff?
That's a great question. Man, that's brutal. Because I think on one side of it, I think we really do have an entire subspecies of creatures that do exist mostly inside the earth, and they are not readily surface dwelling anymore. And I do believe, like in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, man, inside the London Bridge is a massive room, like a throne room, where they engage in this magic. But this Brotherhood of the Serpent, they call upon Nahash, the dragon. And
would that be in normal terms Satan?
Yeah, most people know him as Satan, right? Yeah. But like there is a great red dragon. Like it's a physical, that's what he looks like in reality. He was cursed, and man, he made him a monster. Yahweh made him a monster. And they would commune with these things. There's 13 grandfathers take 13 of their grandsons, and they bring them into these rooms and do these things on these specific times and rituals for all kinds of stuff. But the dragons tell them the future. This is like always what they've been able to do, is like Satan leads Yeshua up onto a great high place and says, I shows him all the nations of the earth and all their kingdoms and their reigns in a moment of time. He shows them the future. That's what they do. They can show you what's to come. This is why we get hunted by them. He knows if we're going to be part of his adversaries. He knows if we're going to be on his enemy list. And that's why he targets us at our youth. That's what so happens. So many people, they're like, why has my life been a nightmare from the beginning? It's because you have a purpose and a destiny that adversary absolutely categorically does not want to come to pass. It's a real life Terminator scenario. And so he sends his assets in to destroy people, to ruin their life. And those meeting places happen when they sit down in these rooms and they try to call up these creatures. It's from inside the earth. It wasn't like ethereal mist. They were physical things that would come out of these tunnels, and they would come into the room and they would consume the offerings that were given there. And then the words of the Nahash would come forth, and they would prophesy to these guys. Like they would prophesy out of the mouth of the serpent what each one of their life callings, their shots. He's the shot caller, man. It's like a pimp from prison. He's calling the shots, and you had a bunch of fallen watchers that were in prison in Tartarus for a reason. Yeah, but they got ways of getting messages out, just like the cronies in jail today, and that's what a lot of people are dealing with. They think they're dealing with the top dog, and they're like, I'm finally into the big game. And it's like you're dealing with, a private in the hierarchy, but he can masquerade like a general. And so some people are really dealing with death himself, and some of them are dealing with one of his princes. And this is what my family's covenant was with the dragon. They didn't mess around, man. They went all the way to the chain of command. They uncovered a bunch of my great-grandfather's grandfather was an archaeologist who dug into Indian mounds out in the Ohio River Valley. And they started finding a priest class that was these serpent worshipers. And that's what they started calling upon. And they started trying to wake up and rise up Huachiblos, which is these deities, these dragon fire deities that
this
demand.
Is in Ohio?
Where these mounds were found. It's the Ohio River Valley. Yeah.
Are we talking about serpent mounds?
Yeah. Well, this wasn't specifically, not that I'm aware of that it was specifically a serpent mound, but it was a mound that was in an area that was now being farmed.
Okay.
And so whether or not it was specifically a serpent mound, it was not identified as that. But they ended up finding a lot of these ancient tomes. They found the writings of this priest class, and they started using their magic to call back up these fallen ones. And they were, the part of the trade is the priest class has all this secret knowledge that they then use to rule the kings with. And that's what they wanted. So that's how the Reynolds family, this is also documented in a book called The Gilded Leaf by Patrick Reynolds, who was a bloodline descendant specifically and in the actual inheritance of the Winston cigarette company, the tobacco empire that ended up buying Nabisco Foods, that ended up running the world.
What relation is it to you? Like an uncle?
I don't know that I am a bloodline relative of that guy.
Oh, okay.
Patrick Reynolds specifically. My Reynolds family is the one that does the black gold stuff, all the secret, disgusting, dirty money. They're the white launderers of the money, right? But you got to have your seedy, corrupt group. And that's what my family did. They did all the dirty stuff.
Wow.
And so but in his book, in his firsthand account, they talk about the Joshua coin and them using a coin that was from Judas that he betrayed Yeshua with, and the 30 pieces of silver that was the blood guilt money. They would touch that silver coin to anything they wanted, and it would grow an empire. The cost was always a massive bloodshed and a massive demand of life. And that's always what the serpent required. He wanted life. And so like on one side of the equation, that's what they used to build the Reynolds empire. That's what they used to go down Alcoa and all the aluminum industry and all of the stuff they spray on us and the stuff they poison us with and inject us with and all the variables of complexities of targeting that they've done against us. That all comes from that covenant that those two brothers sat down, did, and entered into a blood covenant with the dragon, man. And this is what the fruit of it was. Well, my family entered into that on a different route through this priest class thing. And that's what they would practice down there. And that's the same old religion that people have been using a long time. So on one side of it, I've seen physical beings that are definitely not like our animals up here come out of these spaces from inside the earth. I've seen in deep underground military bases, dogmen, like you would kind of describe them, some more humanized. And I think a lot of those were experimentation and genetic splicing. I think a lot of that was gene editing stuff that I've seen. But I do believe that some of these things are holdovers from the old days. They're the last of their kinds, and they've been breeding them, right? And I believe that that's the stuff that's prophesied that's going to come back out and cause the hearts of men to stop for fear of looking after these things that are coming up on the earth. That's why everywhere I went throughout my youth, I could go to these tunnels and these caves and call out, and I could hear them, and they would call back, and it's like it's a seductive power that draws you back into it.
You could call out to them? Like, was it like a language or a sound or what?
Oh, yeah, man. You can learn to call to them. You can go out here in these hills out here and do it. You can still do it tonight on these full moons and stuff. You can start calling out, and you'll think you'll hear coyotes at first, and then all of a sudden it's a totally different, it's a different sound that starts to resonate. And then it's a different one that calls off from over here, right? You got to understand some of these guys that you think are just neighbors and stuff or just people, like this is what they keep in their barn,
Are they
This is the stuff they keep. Yeah. Absolutely.
I go out hunting for these things.
I understand completely, man. That being said, I got hooked back into it with Timothy Alberino and Steve Quill and a lot of these guys when I was married and my wife didn't know anything about this whole stinking world of who I was and everything else.
How'd you meet your wife if she didn't know who you were? You suckered her. You suckered her.
That's a way to put it, man.
She's still with you, so she loves you.
Bro, she's all in, man. She's amazing. Cool. She is my shield bearer, man. She's amazing. She has fought. We have waged a war together beyond your wildest imaginations. She has seen the full force of the occult come after us and people slaughtering sacrifices to try to desecrate us, and people try to hunt us and murder us in front of her face,
She's
man,
seen it.
in front of my children's face. They've sent special kill teams after us in front of my children's face, man. And I have seen the
How
living
recent?
power, man. Recent.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, man.
That being said, man, I do believe that there is a hierarchy and you can call upon the Most High, man, and He has
Yeah.
delivered us. And I've never had to fire a shot at any of these guys. I haven't had to take out their drones. I have seen supernatural intervention. I've seen their weapons jam in front of my face, like chapter in the book called Murder on Their Minds, where I talk all about it, man. I've seen Him provide supernatural miracles because you got to understand, we're dealing with the fallen. We are not dealing with the Most High. And He owns a much more powerful arsenal. And let me tell you, at His word, all these nations, kingdoms, and thrones will bow. And it's an absolute reality. It's an inevitability. And so that's why I serve Him, man, because I've seen what the power of covenant is. And I had a covenant with the law of sin and death before in my life, but now I have a covenant with the Most High of peace and life. And He's given me a new purpose. He's given me a family. He's given me a mission. He's given me the opportunity to do the things I dreamed of when I was that little. Man, I used to run away in the night in Arizona, man, and I would run into the base of that mountain, man. There's these caves that are there that I just love caves. For me, it's safety in that. People call it hunting and all this. I'm like, dude, these to me were people. I'm more like a beast, man. I was ripping people's throats out with my teeth when I was a child to survive a fight. Like that does something to you when you try to see other children playing with a bat wing toy or whatever, and you're like, you're puking blood in the toilet.
Yeah.
Because of all the crap you just went through the night before, you know, and like you are unrelatable to men anymore. You can't comprehend the things that are in your mind when you have been defiled so systemically for so long. And so I just lived with dogs. I literally would flee into the yards with people and I would crawl into the dog loose and just survive the night. But then that wasn't enough, man, because these were city dogs. Then I started looking for the feral ones, man. I started looking for the coyotes, you know, and then I started looking for the wolves and crawling into their dens because I can imitate any of them, man. I can crawl around like a dog and be like a
serious?
dog. You bet, man.
Wow.
You can get them to take you in if you know their language, if you know their gestures. You can learn all of this stuff, man. And like when you're little, when you're like a child, they'll treat you different, you know?
Yeah.
And they like, man, I literally ended up living with these things. And they're like, I have this love for wolves because of that. Because I've understood what a companion can be when you're desperate and distraught. And like, these were my best friends. And that sounds so weird to people, but like when I was a child, I bonded with the animals. I wanted to murder all the people because people were monsters. I couldn't imagine a world of the living. I got so lost in the world of the dead. And I just wanted to find some semblance of innocence and purity. And I could not find it in people because everybody was manipulating me. I was nothing but an asset to them. And I didn't know which end of me they wanted. Do they want my skills? Do they want what do they want from me? And so it perverted my understanding of people. And so I just fled to animals. And that's where like I talk to these creatures and live with them. Well, then you start encountering these other ones, you know, and you start to befriend them. And it just becomes like a pack. Well, then my family would rip me away from that and move, and I would have to try to find a new one. And there was this just constant destabilization. And so there's a lot of people that get caught in that world, man, and people brand them as feral children, like you might want to call it, or whatever you want to call it, man. But they're survivors. That's what they are, man. They're overcomers. They're the remnant. They're the leftovers of nightmares. And you know what? They're some of the most incredible people or things that have ever been. And that's why I'm here to preach the gospel to every creature. That's what it says. My commission from my king who gave me my marching orders is to preach the gospel to every creature. And that's what I'll do, man. I'll do it in the tunnels. I'll do it everywhere from the tops of the roofs to the bottom of the earth. But I'm much more familiar and comfortable down there than I am out here. This is the world of oddities where people think this stuff is like legend and myth and strangeness. And it's like you go into these families, they broker deals with this stuff. They get down with these things and they generationally raise their children to have that seed line in them. So it's a different world than what most people are used to. But I tell you what, these animals they carry a history of what this land used to look like and what these people used to be. And it wasn't that long ago. This is a short history when you think of the last 150 years in the United States. That's not long ago. It was a wilderness. And there used to be 150 million people who lived here, who raised animals and livestock and farmed and cultivated landscapes and brilliant, massive, beautiful cities. And yet they interacted with giants and these creatures that were oddities for time and antiquity.
You're talking about unwritten history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. You keep throwing everything out here. I haven't even got to how you met your wife.
Oh, yeah. We got there.
So are you talking along the lines of like people talking about Tartaria today and like how they basically built over entire civilizations and some of these structures that we have in these big cities? Like, for instance, I've heard this and I've heard both sides of it. So in Philadelphia, they say that City Hall is actually remnants of an old civilization. They didn't. We didn't actually build it. Has been here. Maybe we built on top of it or something like that. But when coming from that area, I used to run Center City, especially as like a rookie driver. They send everybody down to Center City, and so you're pedaling freight down in Center City with a freaking truck, and I can't describe to people how massive City Hall is in Philly. It's one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen in my life, and I've been in it. It is absolutely massive. You will get lost if you don't know where you're going, and I forget how long, but the idea of decades sticks out in my head. Like I was told that it took an extremely long time to build that building. And that always sat weird to me. I was like, how does it take that long to build a building? Like, I mean, this isn't like something that was built, they say thousands of years ago where they were, making the brick by brick, make the brick, then put the brick there kind of thing or whatever, And so that I go off on that spiel because that's something that always sticks out in my head when I talk about Tartaria and things like that. But is that kind of like the angle that you're talking about? Like this idea that there was, you said 150,000 or a million people that lived here and they traded with giants and the cities and civilizations. What happened to those things?
Well, I wasn't really hitting on the Tartaria and the architecture side of it. And there's other examples like the City Hall in Iowa and other places. I traveled, like I told you before, 4.5 years in an RV. And at the time, mud flood in Tartaria was in. And I was like, what? I'm going to go look. So I just started traveling around to these places specifically to try to find and identify and document evidence of this catastrophic event, or like, are these recovered cities, as opposed to the idea that we, all bit these with horse and buggy and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I wanted to know for myself, but that isn't specifically the history line that I was talking about. I'm talking about before that, the side of it that is definitely more like when you go in, like one of the best books for those of you that are book guys, The Discovery and Conquest of Mexico by Hernan del Castillo is the firsthand account of the conquistadors coming into the Americas and their strategies and tactics for infiltrating and enthroning a new deity known as Mary, right? The Queen of Heaven. They wanted to invoke her over this territory. And there was a massive battle between the priest class during that time. And you get to see these hierarchy of these ones that were worshiping in Mexico City predominantly, that was running a massive human trafficking campaign and all the sacrifices and slaughters that are happening for that. I mean, it's nationwide at that point. And we're talking millions of people that are being physically fed through butcheries to the priests. Like that's the way they did it. And that priest class fled north into the Americas when they got persecuted. And they came into the Americas, the Northern America, and they brought a lot of that ideology with them. And they began to use that, weaponize that power and start to take over the people that were up here. And they began to eradicate them and butcher them and force them into compliance with this. And then the land responded with this desecration and all these invaders began to come in. But this is stuff that they had prophesied was going to happen. And so a lot of them, they literally did not fight. They literally had prophecies that there was going to come bearded men with shiny metal helmets and they're going to come and you're supposed to bow down and yield to them. And so that's what they did. That's why you had a few hundred guys with a few horses and dogs, unbelievable hunting dogs, crazy stories in there, full armor, killing squads of people, these dogs single-handedly. It's
From Europe?
Yeah, bro. You want to talk about what dogs can do? We have no idea
Really?
What dogs do. Oh, yeah. DeSoto and what he brought with his dogs in the Americas, most terrifying things that the natives had ever encountered was the dogs, because they would kill hundreds of people, like just jump from one to the next, ripping throats out. Like these are all documented things. So I love that side of the history of understanding where did this all come in here and why was there the expunging of the record of anybody who had a culture or a written language. Well, that's because we wanted to support this ideology of manifest destiny for this invasion force that was coming from Europe, was that it is our right to rule over these savages and to begin to take their territory. But ahead of that was the surveyors, and then following them was this military expedition across the West, which was to the Army Corps of Civil Engineering, eradicate the history of the people out there. And that's what they did. That's why they built dams and rivers and lakes in specific places and changed geography. They're sponging any evidence that this is a advanced civilization. But we have firsthand accounts of people that said, we've been in the biggest cities of Europe, and over here, they're better and more beautiful and more grand and well-designed than anything we've ever encountered.
Wow.
This is not just one. Many, 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 many people that came over here in the beginning could not understand the capacity of the people that were here. This is the origin place of the earth in many more ways than what people think of as Africa. This place is where the first documented evidence of a horse, of a camel, of all of these languages, mummies, the oldest mummies in the world. All this stuff is here. It's just not public.
Wow.
It's publicly accessible. It's just not popular.
You know what's interesting is that you say that, and fast forward a few hundred years, here we are. And now we look at European cities and we're like, man, they're so beautifully built. Look how clean they are, because our cities suck. Like everything's falling apart. Nothing's built to last more than 50 years. Like it's just, it kind of totally flip-flopped. That's wild. So, all right, I'm going to go back again. And I do want to hit on the story of how your relationship with your wife evolved and stuff, because, and we will hit everybody listening right now. First of all, we will ask the question of where are your parents today? How do you what's the story there? Because that's I even told you that's the question I was going to ask you at some point. But I'm looking at I also, while I'm talking here, before we go any further, I didn't say it in the beginning. I will put it in the link in the description. You do have a book. You did mention it. And I was like, dang it, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but it's called Snatched from the Flames, One Man's Journey to Uncover the Family Secrets Buried in His Blood-Stained Past. And that is available on Amazon, and I will put the link in the description of this episode. But let's talk about family. Mm-hmm. Let's start with the family that you love now. Mm-hmm. How'd you meet your wife? How did that whole thing evolve? Did you ever think that you'd have to tell her this stuff? Did you have plans? If not, what spawned you telling her? How did she take it?
Yeah.
All that. I'm very interested on the social side of this. Like
she, when I got out of the military, I ended up studying psychology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I wanted to put people back together. I was tired of taking them apart. And I wanted to understand what the heck was going on in my mind, because when the military washed me out, man, they scrubbed my memory. They did multiple traumatic brain injuries and all kinds of specific things to try to expunge what had happened there. They don't want you telling your secrets. Anyways, I was a dribbling mess. I literally couldn't remember how to walk right, eat right. I had Post-it notes on my wall to tell me to shower and put on clothes and names. I went from savant level IQ kind of stuff to like impossibly debilitated, and it was excruciating on me. And so I just went on this path of trying to just restore my mind and get my mind to function again. And it was in the course of that I ended up going to this church out in Colorado, which is called Flatirons Community Church. And they had this college ministry at the time, and a recovery ministry. And that's really, man, where my heart planted, was in this Celebrate Recovery. They called it Shift.
Oh yeah.
And there was just messy people, bro, that loved the Lord, and they loved Him so much, and they were passionate about helping the wounded. And I was walking wounded, man. I was a heart halter monitor on at the time, man. I was like, I didn't like my whole life. I'm like the last man standing for some stupid reason that I couldn't understand when I was young. It's just, I just wanted to die. I just wanted to die so bad, man. All my life, I just wanted to die, and I never could die. And no matter what anybody ever tried, always I lived, and it just, I was so tired of it. And I ended up going to this church, and these people like loved on me. Not the way like Christians had in the past, in the same way. Like my family was Christians. I went to all kinds of different denominations throughout all of this experience. But meanwhile, my family would pedal me back out the back door, And so my version of what a biblical minister was capable of was so jacked up. I thought they were weak cowards. That's what I knew Christians as. Like I knew that pastors are easy to manipulate if you give them the right tithe check. Like I'd seen what a bribe did to justice. But then I finally start going to this place where it's just authentic people that just were real. And it just gave me such a joy and a hope, man. And I'm a passionate person about whatever I pursue, man. And I pursued that with everything in me. And I'm a natural like evangelist. I'm going to make stuff famous, and I love it. And so anyways, this college ministry exploded out there, and I was the connections lead, and I ended up meeting my wife at this college group that we would have. We'd serve pasta and talk about the scriptures and get to know people outside of Boulder. And she ended up walking down the stairs one day. I write it all very romantic in the beginning of my book, bro. I was like chasing her, and she was like, not about it, dude. I was couch dude at the time. I was like living on a couch because I wanted to have this Harlequin Great Dane, great hunting dog. They're a castle dog. That's what you use to guard your castle. When the master's in the house, they're wonderful. When the master's away, they'll rip your throat out. They're amazing. Anyways, I was raising this dog, so I had to live on a friend's couch so I could have this dog in my dreams. And I met her, and she was just like way out of my league immediately. And I just was like, not having it. It's not going to happen. She was like way older than me and highly successful. And I was like eating out of trash cans, And so but She liked me, man. It was great. It was beautiful, man. I don't know how, but it worked out pretty well, man. I romanced her like crazy. I called them adventures. We didn't call it dating. I just took her on adventures way late at night because she used to work night shifts, so we'd hang out at 3 in the morning.
Dating requires putting up money.
Oh, yeah. Dating requires putting on a title that other people were not about. Like, oh, her sister did not want me to be with her at all. She like sat me down and tried to scare me off.
Really?
Like, yeah, because I was like young. I was like 19 and I was like, bro, I was all over the place, compared to what she was used to. And she's like, my sister's she deserves this, and you're putting you. I'm like, not that.
Yeah.
But anyways, man, I ended up going to Afghanistan, and I was on that trip to Afghanistan that I was like, I gotta be with this woman. I came back and was like, I want to be with you. And she was like, I'll think about it. And I was like, no. I was crushed. But she ended up doing it, man. We ended up like being together, and we ended up getting married a couple of years later. And dude, I didn't tell her any of this. She knew I was a mess. Let me be clear. She was a mess at the time when I met her too. She was a wreck from all the things I was talking about earlier at the hospital that they were forcing her to do, and were just killing her health horribly. And she was sick. And so we got married sick together. It was great. We were a total hot mess. Our first year was a nightmare because I was a screaming nightmare at night. How do you tell that to somebody before we weren't sleeping together before we got married? She didn't know that, She didn't know that I would have these terrors of the night, She didn't know that I was a different person at night. And then all of a sudden into our marriage, my dad comes back in because he wants to control again. He wants to make the money. And I'm a highly monopolized individual to these families. And they wanted that again. And they wanted to turn on the old other side, which is this Nathan and Jason side. And they wanted to make money with that because their business was failing. They're in the bed and breakfast industry now. That's the good cover for all kinds of filthy stuff to happen at a hotel. And they film it and document it and keep it in private drives and create a blacklist on people. But
so that's
the family business.
You're talking about like Epstein type stuff?
Oh yeah.
So I know this, but just for the audience, you're saying Epstein isn't the only Epstein.
That's like late in the game guy.
Yeah.
And I know most people think that's super high level. That's still mid-level in the world of families. He's not the family man in the same way, right? You can run into a different synagogue of Satan everywhere you turn, right? You can run into the great whore of Babylon that sits in Rome and Vatican City all over the place. But then there's these old bloodlines too that are a completely different thing. And they have different ways of controlling people. And information and secrets is what my family trafficked in predominantly. And so my parents on one side, they had a great Christian front in everything they did. But inside, that's where business happened. And it's because they're split personality people. One side is wholly given over to this and the other side is wholly given over to something else, And so that's what I was raised in. And it was as normal as breathing, But my wife didn't know any of this stuff. And she was not from a family like this. She grew up in like a normal middle-class American Christian home, And that did go to focus on the family kind of stuff, And
poor girl.
Bro, it was on. So what the trigger event that changed the whole story was my dad moved back in with us for a few weeks.
How'd you let that happen?
You don't exactly have free will. It's like a real important thing to understand when you're a yes man still. I didn't have anything to really fight for besides my wife at the time. I didn't have children. And like they castrated me when I was young. They make you a eunuch so that you can go into the king's.
Really? So even having kids is a miraculous thing
that's what started it all, dude.
Wow.
So what happened though, my dad changed me around and he brought out the other side of me. And so you wake up in the middle of a marriage and I don't know who my wife is. And I go from being this happy, fun, loving, Nate, wild guy that's shirtless all the time playing and diving into stuff to this guy that's hydrophobic, terrified of water, and is wearing body armor and carrying secret concealed blades and making poisons at night. And she's like, what? Goes by a different name, disowned all my friends, burned my phones. Went full protocol, like sterile protocol. She has no idea what any of this stuff is. She's like, I don't know what tradecraft you're talking about. And she's like, what is happening right now? And I changed clothes, wardrobes, everything. I started getting into this underground world.
Time out. I just got, before I forget this, you might say yay or nay on this, but what you're describing almost sounds like a Jason Bourne type thing. And they named him Jason in the movie. Does that have anything to do with the Jason program, do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the Jason program is for that. Gotcha. To activate those guys. Those are sleeper cells.
We will get into that, but continue your story. I just the dots come and go very fast for me. So.
I understand. You got a lot of dots in there, bro. They connect.
I'm just like, what's going on here?
But so I burned everything in my previous life. But at the same time, let me tell you the saving little what happened though. They meddled. That was a bad idea. because you suddenly give a guy who has been used to being in his teens the last time he had freedom of body, and you suddenly give a guy who's in his 20s, who's got a car and who has no handler on site, and this thing called the internet at his fingertips. And now you can look up anything. And this is what happens. Like between 11 and 3 in the morning, I'm going to start learning. And I just start diving into all this stuff. And you can start asking questions and get into forums and blogs and backdoor access to all kinds of stuff. And I started connecting dots on who was who. Because what they wanted me to do was go after a kill list for them. But I'm not interested in that. I've got a very, very long, old kill list from a lot of other stuff they don't know about and other people don't know about. That's what I was thinking about. I'm like, I'm going to just burn this entire house down. I'm running operations on a coven and a cult that was operating out of Boulder, Colorado. I just started investigating people again, like I do. And I started going out at night, street walking, street preaching on one side of it. But on the other side, I was doing surveillance and counter surveillance on these guys that were running children out of Boulder streets and starting to build dossiers and everything, because that's like what I do. I'd rather live in a cave and come out and do that kind of stuff and then disappear. But I've got this wife who to me was like a lead weight. It was like a giant point of vulnerability. I live in a house. What the heck? I was like ticked. So I was like, pissed all the time. I basically hated her. And she felt that.
Okay.
She felt that.
Gotcha.
You know what a wife will feel? Well, your ambivalence towards her. More than anything you ever do to your wife, she'll feel ambivalence the most because it's the opposite of love. It's not hate. It's ambivalence. And that's what I gave her. And I started wearing knives strapped on my chest and razor blades in my shoes. And she's going to start picking up on stuff like, why are you always wearing guns? Like always. And I'm like, you know why? And she's like, what's that voice?
Do I want to know why?
Yeah. But at the same time, this health crisis happened where she got poisoned and it almost killed her from the hospital procedures that they required. And that was it. She started doing the research. And I was like, if she's going to look into this stuff, I could talk to her about what we're going through a little. Because she, up until that point, dude, couldn't hold her hat with a conspiracy very much. You know what I'm saying? Like you test everybody out your entire life. When you're born into this stuff, all you ever do is test everybody to figure out whether or not they can handle anything related to who you are. And she was growing up, she was getting stronger. But then she got pregnant. And I ended up having a surgery. Let me go back a step. I ended up having a surgery because I had horrific constant testicular pain. I had a lot of kidney pains, kidney stones, peeing blood all the time. Like my body's been through hell, and I have catastrophic shutdowns of my organs regularly at the time. And I ended up getting a surgery to try to help alleviate that. Well, about a year after that, we ended up getting pregnant, which was to me a miracle that I knew the Father wanted me to actually have children, which meant I had to choose. This was the whole story of whether or not I give my daughter over to the family to have access to the trust fund.
Which your dad was there for. Essentially,
he was there previously for a few weeks. He would come in and stay intermittently when he wanted to do workup stuff. But then he moved back down there. He's a critical employee of massive infrastructure in the state of Colorado. Like sits inside a bunker and controls all kinds of stuff. Very successful in that realm kind of person, but a well-placed asset if you want to destroy the entire country's continuity of their grid. He's part of the power control system of the natural gas system, so he can shut down all the power plants. Well-placed asset if you want to burn the world down. Anyways. My wife got pregnant and it was my moment of choosing whether or not we do this. And I was like, at the same time, I was starting to listen to all of these like serious truther podcasts out there by like the hours and hours, whether it was, I don't know, it was like, I think the Hagman and Hagman Report was the first one I heard, Steve Quayle, and then I heard Russ Dizdar on there, and then I heard Dr. Michael Lake. If you've never heard those names, man, check it out. You could go on for a long time on there. But that was like, that launched me into this whole realm of seeing bold men be warriors for the kingdom. And I was like, finally, somebody with some chutzpah, like in the kingdom, representing how to deal with this stuff. Because up until then, I had a track record of psychopaths winning every time. Right? I always saw the bad guys win, and that does something to you psychologically. It's a confirmation bias. And then when you suddenly see a guy like Russ Dizdar who was preaching to people like me who are coming out of occult bloodlines, who were deep into this ritualistic abuse and dealing with deliverance, and that's when it was on, man. And I was like, my wife was pregnant. She doesn't know any of this about me, but my family's going to want to take that baby out of her womb when she gives birth to it and imprint upon it. Like it's disgusting what happens right away at the birth. And I was like, they're going to drug her and they're going to take her child. She's not going to have any clue how they do this. I was like, we got to fight. We got to resist. I'm going to go all in for the kingdom of righteousness. And I'm going to absolutely do everything I can to sever ties with my family. And so I went to this conference called Hear the Watchman Conference down in Dallas, Texas.
What year?
2014, I believe.
Wow.
And And that's where chapter 5 is called Deliverance in Dallas. And that's where I heard Russ Dizdar speak. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard him speak. It was the first time I'd heard him speak was at a conference where he was talking about runners, guys like me, blade people and all this other stuff. And my wife looked over at me as he was describing me, and she kept looking at me like, this kind of like sounds like you, honey. This kind of sounds like you, like more and more and more. She's like touching all. She's like, what?
How many knives can I touch?
She's like, yeah, oh dude, that was nothing. Those are the ones to just, yeah, it was crazy. So now we're down at this conference in Texas, and she still doesn't know anything. She's 6 months pregnant. Like, game is coming on time, right? Like, we got to figure this thing out. And I fall on my face at the end of his preaching. He calls like people, if they want prayer, come to the front. Man, I run up there and I fall on my face and I weep like I've never wept in my life. Just desperate for that evil, like that latent seed out. I want it out so bad. I want to be a man of free will. I want to know what others took for granted from their youth, which is to make a decision without somebody else's manipulations in your life. Like, I just wanted freedom, and I wanted my child to never have to know the world that I was born into. I wanted her so badly to get to choose for herself what her future would become. And I was so inadequately equipped to do that for her. I had nothing, but I had a willingness to fall on my face and cry out to the one who had everything. And I believed on him, and I called on him, and just was wrenching my heart out on that floor, man. And this guy, Tom Dunn, he laid down on the floor next to me, man, and was like, what's going on? You know, you're clearly upset, dude. You know, like, and I'm just sobbing hysterically and asking for deliverance from addictions and sexual addictions and drug addictions, you know, substance abuse issues and stuff. I've coped with that my whole life. You know, I was so perverted. I didn't understand normalcy with any of these things. And he just prayed for me. It wasn't like some wow thing, but he just prayed for me honestly and sincerely and asked Jesus to heal me, man, and deliver me. And when he did that, man, it was like this giant black tree just got ripped out of my brain. That's the cover of my book, man, was like the Father. He took this hand, and he took that pierced hand, and he gave me a transplant. You know, he took me out of that family of death, and he gave me a branch of life to live again with. You know, and that's where it started. Somebody else at the same conference, random person walked up to me, handed me this folder, and disappeared, like straight up disappeared in a line I was in. And I was like, what? And she's like, you need to read this. And it was all these prayers for breaking the curses from generational sins of Freemasonry. And I was like, what? And I'm like, what is this? It was Isaiah 54 Ministries. It's on my website, but they burned that website to the ground after I put my book out. But I've got it archived and stuff if people want to still see that. But I went through it back in Colorado, and I prayed those prayers, man. And I did all this renunciation for all of these oaths that my family had taken and that things that I had been a witness of. And that's when it was on. That's when the war kicked off, man, was because then all of the memories, everything was there at the forefront. And that's when they knew I was not going to be a part of it. And that's when I went direct back to them and was basically like, listen, I forgive you guys personally for the wrongs and the evil that you have done to me. But you need to understand, Grandpa still is a pervert. Like, and you're still taking your grandchildren to him, and that better stinking stop. You know, like it was like a showdown. Initially, my dad's like, I'm sorry, I know this stuff happened to you. I'm really sorry that it happened to you. Like, I'm the dad, I'll fix it. And then at the same time, he was like, don't tell your sisters. Don't you dare tell your sisters. You can tell anybody you want. I don't care. Just don't tell your sisters. So that's immediately what I did, right? I'm like, game on, son. You want to fight that way? So I went and told my sisters. And then it was just this, she curling up in a fetal position and reverting back to this infancy thing and just like, I don't remember. And then they bring in somebody else to live with her, like a handler to scrub her and control her, because they have big families still that are still in, you know, and that's
so your sisters are still in?
Oh, yeah.
So when you talk to your sisters,
I have not talked to them since.
Okay.
That was the last time I talked to them.
They didn't remember at first, and you were triggering memories? Is that what was going on?
Yes and no. Well, my oldest sister, I don't name any of my sisters because there's a lot of innocence still at play. I'll name all kinds of people, just not them. But my oldest sister, like, when I started talking about it, reverted back to the stuff and was like, I need help. I need counseling. I need deliverance. I need, like, please help me with all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And she wanted help and wanted to get out. And the next day when I went back to talk to her, she was gone. That version of my sister was gone. And they had this young guy that had moved into the house overnight. And she literally couldn't tell me anything about anything I said. She didn't remember anything that had happened. She didn't remember, like, me coming there to the house the previous day to talk to me about any of this stuff. She was just completely aloof, right? And that was my last interaction with her. And my dad freaked out when he heard that I had told her all this stuff. And then I went to talk to my other sister, who is closer in age to me, at a splash pad. I talk about this stuff in my book. Her and I are visiting at the splash pad. I brought my wife, Chelsea, with me as a kind of corroboration to all this stuff. And she was really responsive in a good way. But then right in the middle of it, my dad showed up at the park. And I mean, he slammed into the parking lot and came barreling over and had this screaming showdown with me in the park, calling on crazy and powers and stuff. Like, the guy went from his Christian self to this whole other thing in front of my wife's face for the first time. My dad was you would have never seen a lick of scary ever until that moment. And then this other thing came out of my dad, the principality of the Reynolds family that he is in covenant with. And that came roaring out and cursed my marriage, cursed me with insanity, cursed my wife. You're going to be naked. All these horrible things. He's screaming and cussing at the top of his lungs at a splash pad. This is like a real splash pad. Little children like, ee! And there's this like demonic, massive battle going on over in the corner. And I was rebuking him and calling, like, it was like the sword that was in my mouth was far greater than his, because I had the power, the authority of the Holy Spirit like I'd never had in my life. And I couldn't even hardly articulate the power that was on me. But he physically got up and ran away from me, screaming over his shoulder, ran as fast as he could and drove away, terrified of me. And that was the last time I ever saw my father, was that moment. That was the last time I ever saw my sister. You know, I've not spoken with any of them since, you know, because at the end of the day, they still sent my grandfather there to receive my daughter when she was born. He still flew up to the state to try to get access. I had a sting at one-man army standing in the birth center, you know, ready to run and gun with that guy if he showed up. But my family has never had access to my children since then. And now we have more children. Now I have 4 children. And that was the start of so much of that journey, though, was we're going to do whatever we can to get away from this. But at the same time, they sent a lot of stuff after us when we were still at that property and in that house. And there was a massive, long story there. That's what that chronicles our journey out of that, until we eventually wrote the book. I started speaking out on shows, and I was like, if I'm gonna come out, I'm gonna come out with everything all right now. I'm not gonna be like, I got some secret documents, you guys, you don't want to know about, you know. It's like, no, you just burn it. Yeah. You burn the whole house down. That's the best way to do it. Yeah.
I've been told that if you have sensitive stuff, you don't just piece it out. You drop it like a nuke.
That's right.
Do it all at one time.
Oh yeah.
And that's good that you did that.
There's still a lot of dead man switches out there. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of contingencies that are available should it ever go real bad. But she loved me, man. That woman loved on me like nobody else has ever loved me. Her name means safe harbor.
Really?
And that's exactly what she was to me.
Wow.
Because I had to tell her all this stuff, man. And I came unglued on her. I mean, I became everything worst version of me I'd ever been. And she loved on me, and she was so mad. She was just enraged at the evil of what this family was. She was enraged. And then you start collecting evidence. She started going on to their Facebooks and started gathering evidence and seeing all this perverse stuff. You know, they line their boys up naked and take pictures of them and put them on their mantles. Like, you come pick which one you want. Like, this is real family business. You can walk into their house and they'd have
like framed pictures
of kid children, little boys stacked up in the entryway when you walk into their house, so you could pick which client you wanted, you know.
And she was finding that on Facebook?
Bro, you'd find this on, they think it's cute. They're like, oh, it's just cute little babies and boys and stuff. Jeez. And I'm like, no, dude, my family had a photo album that they would hand to a customer and they could pick what version of me they wanted. Like, this is like a menu that they offer to clients. This is really how like the business works. And it's like, this is still a reality. So,
all right, version of you. So it's like they pick a version and they got push the certain buttons to get that version of you to manifest.
Yeah, then they get a code book that goes with it, and that brings that personality out.
Really?
You know, because if you want a cross-dressing girl, this is how you get that.
Wow.
And that's what that whole personality is shaped to be with. Or if you want somebody that's into different things, they have this. And so that's a code book. You know, that's like the little red book that controls somebody is a real thing. Well, sometimes you give people a page from it, and they pay for that page for a certain amount of time. That's what they get. But others, they're going to get a page from Jason. You know, that's what the military bought from my family, was my black book, so that they could have an asset as their own. And then they're going to rewrite the program and then make it just theirs. That's what my dad didn't want anymore. He wanted back that chain of command. He wanted full control and sovereignty over me that the military took away from him. He wanted that back. That's why he went and tried to meddle. The problem is he woke up the wrong guy. Mm-hmm. You know, a very dangerous person to wake up who knows how to burn houses.
Yeah. I'm glad we're friends. I hope we're friends.
You betcha.
I mean,
man, you're
just
advancing the
mention,
right
but
kingdom, bro.
I like you. I like you. So hopefully you like me. Man, I love my job. I meet such interesting people. So, when I was driving tractor trailer, I would listen to a lot of podcasts, and that was in the days of the wild west of YouTube, where they didn't just take everything down. This is like pre Jones takedown of 2017. That was the marker of everything. And I would hear, people talk about people like you, Dizdar, and he's passed, right?
Yeah, man, they killed him and Rob Skiba in the same week.
We'll get into that in the overtime. No, but I just, so I'm hearing these stories and stuff, and I'm like, really? Is that really possible? And here I am years later, and I have all these years of experience under my belt that brought me to a point where I'm just like, coming into today, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that stuff's possible. But I really, like, I've never sat down across the table from somebody who has been in such positions as yourself. And it's just, I'm just taken back by so much in a good way. That's just like, whoa, you mentioned something several times on this recording that I need to bring up. How do you, I don't know if get around is the right word, but how do you feel what's going on when it comes to you openly, publicly acknowledging the fact that you've killed people? Like, is that something that you're concerned about? I mean, as far as like repercussions from whether like, law enforcement to, these shadow organizations coming forward and be like, yo, like, I mean, you mentioned about how there's been recent attempts on your life. What about the legal side? What if like a police car comes driving up to your home right after this episode airs? Like, I'd feel completely guilty about that. I feel so horrible, man.
I'd feel
Why
different.
Why you gotta say that on my show?
I'd feel different if it was a little bird helicopter. It's it's a police car. Just smile. It's like, I think people have this idea of what law enforcement is in our country. And it's a very good masquerade for what law enforcement is in this country. There's laws that apply to people, and then there's laws that apply to others. And then there's a whole group of people that no law applies to them. And I was so familiar with that experience. Like, you want to kill somebody and you're in the family, right? You mark you mark them. You might cut their ring finger off and put it in their mouth and shove a dagger through it and leave it in their jaw. Okay. And you leave that at the scene. That is what's called a message to the masses, that this hit has been authorized by somebody far above your pay grade and you leave it the heck alone. It happens all the time. There's a lot of murders that happen in this country, all over the world, that will never be on the news. Families. Like, I'm talking to a guy who's a migrant worker, and his family is in the cartel and is a sicario. If you don't know what a sicario is, it's an assassin. Hashashin is where these words come from. And he goes in, he's living in a normal town here in the Appalachians, and his next door neighbor, all of them are murdered. All of them. Father, wife, children, everyone butchered on the table in pieces. That's a message to the masses. That's not on the news. I looked it up. It's not on the news. It's there if you dig. But that's a huge, massive, could be the most unbelievable news story for a lot of these news junkies. It's never going to be there because it's a cartel hit. You got to understand who these cartels are. They're families, different families, and they are fighting a war, a quiet war. And this is why you have gray men that are out there to do their dirty business, gray women too. But there's stuff that's non-prosecutable in the United States. And a lot of it happens if you have diplomatic immunity. And that's what a lot of these people operate under, the same guidelines of that. I don't have that. I don't have any of those protective measures in place whatsoever, but it was as familiar as breathing to me to go through that world, and that was normal, that murders happen all the time and nobody ever cared. Nobody ever cared, right? But also the vast majority of what you do and you're trained in is to kill people covertly. which means you make it look like something other than an incidental death or an accidental death, as opposed to that's a homicidal death.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is learning how to put things in people's body that cause them to die. Maybe not right away, maybe later. And so this is the arts of poisons. And that's why people will turn to the Jesuits to learn that tradecraft, because they're some of the best at it, right? That's what so much of it is, learning how to destroy people's vehicles so they don't work properly, or they suddenly just gas on the way all the way. There's lots of it involves throwing people off of cliffs and buildings and stuff like that, so that it's the banker suicide, whatever it may be. That's why the vast majority of the stuff is non-prosecutable, because all of it, if you look into it, or if they start finding where these bodies are, they're going to look like accidental deaths. That's what the vast majority of it is. But at the end of the day, like, I believe that the truth is what will set me free. Like, I know his word, and I believe his word, and I know that it is what sets me free. And at the end of the day, my physical body on this earth is irrelevant towards the kingdom that is coming. Like, I have a duty to continue to advance the kingdom of righteousness no matter what. And I have a duty to speak the truth, because he says in here very clearly that anything that I did in secret is going to be brought up to the light. Everything they've done in secret is coming to the light. And I'd rather be the one to bring it to the light than the guy who's my enemy to do it when I don't want it to happen. So I knew sooner or later, if I'm still going to live and have a family, I better tell people my worst things right now, as opposed to it coming to the light later on when I've been trying to do ministry and trying to raise a family and just be a righteous man and trying to no longer be the gray man, And that's a war that still happens internally on a regular basis, because I find cults everywhere. I find child abusers everywhere. And it's hard to turn off old, well-seasoned, strong muscles to just turn their world inside out. But you realize that there's a way that you have to do this. And anybody that's out there on the front line that's spoken about these things, you potentially do suffer the consequences of it. But you know what? At the end of the day, I'm going to advance the kingdom no matter what it costs is. I've had police surround my vehicle before. I've had experiences like that. Not for me, miraculously, but for somebody else, And every time I'm kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, I felt that kind of anticipation that it could happen. It could, and that's part of it. But if that starts it's going to unzip a whole lot on the things that's called discovery in a lawsuit.
Which that shouldn't be discovered.
Dang right. And that's why these things get dismissed, because of reasons of national security. And nobody's going to have a freaking idea of what happened in there. Mm-hmm. And that's what I experienced plenty of times.
Yeah.
I've seen it never come to court, because that guy, like when I do blood tests, like that gets sealed. Like if I tried to donate blood today, you would not believe what the heck happens to the poor guy that I hand that blood off to. Right? He's going to go through a freaking hell, and they're going to recover that because it's classified technology, what's inside there. They're like, you're not allowed to have access to this stuff. Like that's what a lot of these soldiers come out of these programs, and they're like, you're not allowed to give blood ever. If you go to a hospital and you go to a checkup, you better call us before you do. And this is the stuff that ends up happening through the rest of your life that they don't tell you about when you're like, yeah, I'm around all these guys and want to be stronger. Yeah, I want to be stronger. I want to be strong. I want to be able to carry all kinds of stuff. And they're like, here, you just come line up and take another shot in your arm. You're like, yeah, I feel great. I feel like you're dying for a while. And then all of a sudden you're like, I am carrying 260 pounds. I'm a little dude. I was like, this is great. Give me more. Right. And that was like, I could go off all day on that. But what they don't tell you is the side effects. And you're like, yeah, you're probably going to only have a kidney for about another year. And that's what happens. You're like, why are all my teammates dying? Why are all of them dying? All of them. Why are all of them dead?
Their purpose was served.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a duration on those things built in.
Wow. I had a guy on the show not too long ago. I think I mentioned this to you earlier, but he basically, he felt, he didn't want to say he was a super soldier. I called him a super soldier because
you don't need to brand it.
Yeah. I was like, dude, like but he's like, listen, I was in the military. I was young and I received these shots. And when I received these shots, I was able to do things that I couldn't before. I think he could run the mile like incredibly fast. Mm-hmm. His strength, but he said it wasn't ultimate strength. He said there's parts of his body that just seemed normal strength, but if he did a certain exercise, like it would be like, whoa, couldn't do this before. And he would max out like machines and stuff. And I have to run a show, so I called him a super soldier. But I don't know how else to describe him. But he seemed like he was very hesitant to really cross that line and be like, yep, that's what happened. Like he's like, I don't know how to explain it. I'm like, I'll do it for you. Yeah. That's
the Uberpunch.
Was that?
That's the super soldiers from the Aryans.
Germany.
Yeah, but that program, their children. Don't forget about the breeding races. They bred hundreds of thousands of women with these super soldiers. And all their children was the progeny of that. That's who we're talking about. All those people got jobs in certain places and began to have children of their own. Like these These families have been doing genetic meddling for a long time. And other people just stumble into it. Like there's scientific community who stumbled into it a lot during World War II. But this is old religion stuff. This is what made the families rule people. Because like most of you guys can't stay awake for 3 days and be brilliant the entire time. Most people, I've like had to learn this over life.
I love how he said you guys.
Sorry, I don't mean that.
Like,
you just said at 9
you
p.m.
guys. Not me, you guys.
You said earlier it's like 9 p.m. and you were tired and didn't want to get something done. And I'm like, yeah, man, like you've been awake 3 days, you know, like it's weird. I didn't know it wasn't normal until I sat down. My wife and I stopped watching the TV, man. And we started talking to each other face to face like this. And all of these stories began to come out about what her childhood was like. And I was like, what? That's what a Christmas is like?
Wow.
I'm like, I realized I was raised in a cult. It just was so controlled that I didn't realize it was not normal to have grandpas doing that to their grandsons. Like I genuinely didn't understand the level of insane life I had because I'd been around, I was only allowed access to other people that had that kind of stuff. So then if I talked about it, they're like, yeah, of course, that's what uncles do. It's just creepy, weird stuff, whatever. But her and I are talking about this stuff and I'm starting to tell my stories to her and she is like sick. She's like, that's not okay. Like that should never happen. I'm like, I'm telling you about one day. I was like, what do you mean never happen? Like happened for years. Like, what are you talking about? Like I didn't have the paradigm of understanding what a normal person life was like. My parents, my mom, the women would stay awake when there was these family reunions because it was disgusting. And they didn't want their children getting. And so they would stay awake for days. And I thought that was normal. They'd be awake watching everybody, like all the time for days. And they would be out of their mind by the end of it, right? They're like hallucinating and all the rest. But they just didn't want their children or grandchildren to go through what they knew their husband did, or they knew that his brothers did in the Knights of Columbus. Like they just wanted to try to protect him. But I thought it was normal that parents and moms would be awake for days on end and just suddenly pick up one day and we're going to travel 2,700 miles, you know? And like, that's normal. I thought that's how people were. I didn't understand people needed like rest and recovery and all of this. You could just switch personalities and keep going and backlogging it and use augmentation from whatever, drugs, people, anything you needed, you know? But like they extracted all kinds of stuff out of people and that was what they would run off of, you know? And it was their little serum, you know, that they would, their nectar of the gods that they would run off of. But it's just human hormone isotopes in a lot of ways, blood plasmas and stuff like that they would use. But this stuff would just jack them up and they just go for days. You know, and it's this new way of augmenting the brain that they utilize. And other people think they're just buying little pills, but that's what they're getting. You know, it's the byproduct of that industry. And so it took a long time for me to hear that. But when I hear people talk like normal about like energy levels and capacities and things, like it helps to humble me back to like experiences around of like, not everyone's lives are like this. Not everyone's so extreme in everything they do. There's people that live balanced lives and it's good. And I think that's what I was genuinely hungry for by the time I met my wife and by the time we started raising a family. It's like, I want to know what it's like to just raise a family because I realized I had no idea how to do it. So I started just moving with my RV into places where people were living in a way that I wanted to. I wanted to imitate their lives. So I started living around families that were raising their children in this very peculiar way, raising them up at home, on farms, on homesteads, on properties. Like I'm just a sponge for learning and adapting what I've seen to be successful and imitating it. And I just wanted to be around authentic men. You know, I was so hungry for it because most of us are raised by idiots. Most of us are raised by women. And that's on one side good. But if you don't have a righteous man, a zealous, passionate, capable father, you're so broken. It sets you up for failure in a bad way, especially once you have children. And so much of my life now has been trying to build a new family, build a new legacy and understanding of like, what can we build without the access to the empire? Because I don't want the blood money. Like I want my children to know purity. I want them to understand what the gift is of creativity and curiosity. And I want to cultivate for them a life of abundance and of passionate pursuits. And that's what's led me into permaculture and into studying under all of these regenerative farmers and into this just whole other industry that I have such a love and a passion for. You know, like I was cleaning out chicken pens and goose coops and rotating tractors and moving fencing. I was up till 11:15 last night moving poly netting, you know, so that my geese have some more better grass to get onto, you know, like, yeah. And I love that, you know, I love that. But at the end of the day, like there's another half of me, man, that just, I drove through a tunnel on the way here and I could have cried. I felt like I was coming home, you know, like I miss the underground. I miss that world. I miss my brothers in arms, you know, like there's a lot of them out there and a lot of them are dads now and they're just still sleeper cells. You know, they still don't have a clue on how to get out. They still have no idea how to stop the nightmares and how to stop the screaming rage fest and how to, like they're doing everything they can to hold it together, man. And they're falling apart. And that's why I'm out here.
So on that note, you I'm assuming one of your motivations is to help them get out.
Yeah. Or stay in and get it done. Yeah.
Do you want to go back in and get it done?
Bro, every day of my life.
So,
but I made a different choice. I made a covenant with my wife. That's different, you know?
Yeah.
My wants became subjected to another. And and her needs supersede my wants every day of the week. And I got to lay down my life for her. That's the joy that I get to do. I get to sacrifice my dreams on the altar of marriage. And it's a good thing because then I allow the Father to build for me an inheritance that I didn't gain hastily.
Wow. That's deep stuff, man. That's deep stuff. I'm going to bring up one more topic before we transition into the military stuff heavy. And this kind of goes back to these creatures and such. You said about underground. Do you think that there's coming a time where they're going to be coming up in abundance and humanity is going to be faced with a very real reality, not just dorks like me that have a podcast to talk about it, but these normal people who think I'm crazy? Do you think they're going to be faced with the reality that these monsters do exist? And what do you think that would look like if it happened?
I think the better question is what's been written first and foremost, because I can have an opinion on an idea, but it's been prophesied that this is absolutely going to come to pass. And it says a third of dominion is going to get given over to death. And this is why I say it's the underground for a reason. Like that's where they build their armies. They build them inside the earth and they release them when they're ready. But it says that dominion's given to them to kill a quarter of the earth with a sword, with plague, with famine, and the beasts of the earth. That's not your little chihuahua. You know, this is the beasts of the earth. These are the real beasts. And these are the beasts that know they're beasts and they've embraced it. And there's a lot of people that, man and beast were created on the sixth day, both of them. There's a difference. We're image bearers of our creator. The beast is not. But any man can become a beast if he wants to. And he's willing to do anything it takes in order to become that. And there's a lot who have done that. And then there's a whole lot of them that have been bred and created and cultivated and shepherded for this time because they're their soldiers, you know? Like the conquistadors, when they came here, man, they came with an armada, okay? They came ready to invade, and they brought beasts that these people had never seen in their lives. You got to understand what a horse did to these people, because the horses had been here in the Americas long before the Spaniards got here. That's a lie that you all learned. They're like, yeah, the Spanish brought the horses. No, they just don't want to tell you that the horse has always been here. It's just that it wasn't all over here. And when those war horses showed up, right? These are animals that get drunk on blood. These are animals that eat blood. These are dogs that are trained to eat blood. Elephants that are used in battle that are trained with mulberries to eat blood. Like these are beasts, and they are nothing but a beast. You don't put that beast out in the child's playground because it will kill every child in that place. Those are the beasts of the earth. And there's a lot of those kinds of beasts like you're talking about. People might throw in this cryptid category, whatever else. But no, these are just hunters and killers. And that's what they're effective at. And I believe a lot of them, though, still have the capacity of sentient thought, and they're capable of having a redemptive plan of their life and a purpose and a trajectory. Just most people aren't ready to comprehend or contend with that. So that's why, I'm out here trying to tell people about dragons. I'm trying to explain to them the realities of what these serpents are and understand what this class of beings really are and their progeny are, and that we are still have dominion and authority over them no matter what they are. But also with some of them, you better learn how to fight kinetically against creatures that are not on what you would consider as your top 10 big game animal hunting stuff. And that's what launched me into advanced weaponry and development with the military and stuff, is because of need. I wanted to fight back against something that had scaled armor that was like sapphire hard. And I'm like, that's what we put on our battle tanks and our helicopters. Like, how the heck does this creature have a skin that produces a scale that is as hard as a sapphire? Well, I better figure out what a better kinetic penetrator is to get through that. And so that's what launched me into this desire, was to physically learn ways to fight these creatures. I had to find out how to do that. And now I think a lot of people are in this la-la land, but they're being incrementally exposed to it through media and entertainment as a way to soft condition them with disclosure to be able to palatably accept these things. And that's been a conditioning of the masses through its own form of behavior modification, so that they will have a category in their head of what to do with that when it shows up on their door. But the vast majority of them are going to be given over through terror. They're going to be terrified and they're going to freeze. And that's all it takes, man. You give a predator a frozen target, game on, son. That's what happens. A lot of them will fall to that.
Wow. Well, we're just getting started, and I want to talk to you more about a lot of this kind of stuff. But before we end down this first segment, I want to bring back up the book. And like I said before, the link is in the description. Snatched from the Flames, One Man's Journey to Uncover the Family Secrets Buried in His Blood-Stained Past, Nathan Reynolds. And I appreciate you being here, man. Is there anything else you want to promote other than your book?
Yeah, man, they can go to snatchedfromtheflames.com. That's a better place they can go to find everything, all our media content, because we also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Nathan Reynolds, and the Linen Railroad. Rumble, same thing. And Snatch from the Flames is the Twitter handle as well, or TikTok. They can go there. But I have an audio version of the book as well, and you guys can download those there and name your own price. I also have an entire recording, the audio of the scriptures that I did, which to me is far more imperative, is what's been written as opposed to what I've said, you know. And so I just hope people would be able to find comfort in His Word and find restoration of their identity and their calling, and that they would embrace the path of life, man, and flee the path of death.
Well, if you didn't like this episode, I don't know what got you guys here, because this was a heater. I appreciate everybody listening to the show. And if you're a member, just head on over to the membership section on the website or in the YouTube channel. And the overtime is available for you right now. For everybody else, I love yous. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Share the show far and wide. And until next week, stay safe, take care, and remember, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Bye. We're in the overtime, and people just missed a fun little story that I'm not going to ask you to repeat. So it's not imperative. Don't worry.
You missed out.
We were just talking about hide and seek and his special skills with that game.
Yeah. So, terrifying farmers.
Yeah. Okay, so that was an awesome first half of the show, and gosh, man, like, talk about all over the place. Like, you're one of those people that you have so much that you're spitting out things that I was like short circuiting. Like, I was like, just hold on to that. Please don't forget that. That's why I'm like typing down notes. I'm just like keywords, like, trying to make sure I remember. And we, throughout the period of that conversation, we touched on the military stuff, and I want to kind of turn into that, and that might loop back around to other things we were talking about, but I want to make sure we dedicate time to this idea, because one, I find it very interesting, but it sounded like when we were talking in the pre-show, how like it seems like there was like, that's like a distinct chapter of life for you. Mm-hmm. And obviously ties into it, like you said about how your dad sold to the military, that page of the book kind of thing, here's the codes for that, and so from that launching pad of whatever I just said, I guess you did reference the different things throughout that conversation where like you wanted to go into the military. Mm-hmm. Was going into the military for you something that was resisted by the family, but they basically said, okay, fine, you can go into the military? Or was that like okay, yeah, that's perfectly mm-hmm. acceptable, mm-hmm. like, because obviously underneath this kind of guidelines of a life, it sounds like they had plans for complete control of you mm-hmm. forever. Mm-hmm. And so was that part of their controlled plan or what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I was aloof to throughout a lot of my life was that my family was working very hand in hand with the military, and my dad's handler was a military asset, and I didn't know it at the time. And he was just another uncle to me. Like, we would go on all these trips to visit uncles and friends but they were always family members, not biological. And so my uncle was a dentist in the United States Army, and he was the one who was in charge of a lot of the running programs on soldiers. Every soldier's got to go to the dentist every so often, and it's a good position to have your mind control handler sitting in, and so it was from early on, I got baited really hard when I was a teenager, really young teen, like 13, because they busted a special team, busted a child abuse situation that was taking place that I was present at. And I got to see them do a rescue, and I got to hear about this team that was called the Lobos. And these were these special operators that did child rescue, and they did strategic eliminations. And I didn't know then I'm meeting my next handler, but I think I'm meeting the best guys in the world. These are the heroes that I've always longed to be, the guys who had all the arsenal, everything they needed to be successful at doing this in mass. And to me, that's what had been groomed in me throughout my life, through the early experiences of when I was allowed to handle weapons, what were the circumstances that gave me access to it, when I got a green light versus all my life was basically a constant red light of you're not allowed to let yourself loose against anybody. My whole life and childhood, I was conditioned to be anonymous, to never stand out, to never be excellent, to never pop up on anybody's radar ever. And that's why we lived there. I didn't realize how much I'd been conditioned to that mentality. And the only time I was ever allowed a green light to come out of that was in this an exceptionalism mode when I was out hunting, when I was out seeking and searching for targets. That's when it was allowed to all come out. But otherwise, it's just compartmentalized in that other side of me. And what happened was I started getting introduced into this scientific community of parents. It wasn't like guys in suits and stuff like that. It was like dads at luncheons and barbecues and stuff like that. You just start like meeting. And they are part of what's called the Jason projects. And the Jason program is a scientific committee that is a advisory group. Basically, they're consultants. That's how they bridge themselves. There are some intellectuals, you would call them, or guys that come out of universities. And they were recruited in during the Cold War. And their goal was to deal with all these nuclear weapons secrets. And what are we going to do with contending in the Cold War? And so they would come to them, the United States Navy, the Army, whoever would come to them and ask them to fix a problem for them. And they would pool these mental resources together, and they would meet a few times a year and discuss all these issues, super top secret, right? Above top secret. Anyways, they started this program in Southern California. And this is where my family had all these connections through the child trafficking organizations that were down there. And they started getting connected to this scientific group. Well, when you show a certain level of accolades, when you do personality testings, they start really early on in these families. They start trying to figure out exactly what cranks your gears. When you start popping up on certain algorithms, they're going to start to push you into different fields. And so my family chose for me the field of military intelligence and military espionage, counter-espionage. And that's what, to me, I liked it. And I wanted to do that. And so I got introduced to these people that would become my handlers. And that was part of what's called the Junior Jason Project, which is something you can look up online today. That's a project that now tens of millions of children have been through. They may not understand what it's for, but they pair these super elite specialized teachers with children and give them a custom catered education that gives them access to a totally different realm of normal schooling to what children have versus others don't. From that, they have finders inside there to recruit children into the family or into one of these interagencies. Like this is what NASA recruits from a 9-year-old child. That's a genius. They're like, we want them to be ours. So then they give them a tutor, a mentor, a handler who's going to cultivate them to be in these industries throughout their life. And so this is how a lot of these companies, you'll see all of them, Exxon, Mobil, Apple, Facebook, they all send their trained agents to find headhunters into this child organization to try to find them. And so this is public knowledge. This isn't like woo-woo, scary conspiracy level stuff. This is like the reality of how the world finds good managers level people. And then they want to find CEOs, and then they want to find board of directors. This is how they build them out. They start them in childhood. And you need certain children that have accolades towards psychopathy. And the way you do that is by patterning conditioning early on to make them not capable of having the same type of human experiences as others. And so that they're capable of making these kinds of decisions that other people are like, how can they do this stuff to us? And it's like, you're not a them to them. You're a something else. You're an ant. And it's like, it really is like an ideological reality when you've experienced the level of life that you go through in these families. And so the Jason Project for me was this opportunity to be around brilliant intellectuals and express this side of my mind that was always stifled. I was always like put in remedial class, and I could piss my way out of a paper bag like early on. This is a joke. I hated schooling. I hated it so much because I was with idiots all the time. And they were deliberately made that way. The deliberate dumbing down of our society is strategic, but I hated being in that environment. And so then I was finally around all these brilliant minds and I was all in, and they were into the stuff that I loved so much, which for me was a lot of what's called, it's basically types of metamaterials. That's the stuff that I love, metamaterial sciences, that I'm just absolutely enamored with because like I shared earlier, I wanted to know how to fight these things. I wanted to know how to fight these things that go bump in the night that most people don't think about. I wanted to fight hardened targets. I wanted ways to be able to do that. And they were working with metamaterials that I really loved. And one of the predominant ones being plutonium. And I had this absolute just fascination with plutonium from a young age because a target that I went after in the 1950s, they created a product that was an unlimited battery. And they began to put it in, they called them patients that needed a pacemaker. That was the cover story. They're like, these
It's
guys.
always the pacemaker.
They're like, these guys, they need pacemakers. And they're like, we have this thing that's called plutonium-238, which comes from the process of the breakdown of plutonium. It's also done in uranium. Like it happens inside nuclear reactors. And so this got me into the world of cyclotrons and particle accelerators. And this is what the Jasons do. They go and work in this kind of skinny, slimy underworld of advanced research when it comes to particle accelerators. They're from the 30s. Particle accelerators were around the 1930s. That's a weird paradigm shift to most people about Fermi labs and what happens at deep underground military bases. But a lot of it is scientific research. And what comes out of it are these exotic materials, like something that's called neptunium. Neptunium is what runs the underworld. It's one of the main building materials that's on a periodic table. You can look it up. It's like a thing. You just don't know about it because you're not allowed to. It doesn't matter to you. They're going to be like, yeah, there's 2-3 pictures of it, And it's like neptunium is a superconductor at room temperature. Now start to think about the capacities of if I had this made out of this is a good conductor, right? But if it's a superconductor, right, you can have magnetic levitation. You can do all kinds of stuff with electric fields that leads you into the realm of X-class aircraft. And that launches you down into this whole thing of electrogravitics and dealing with B-2 stealth fighters. And that's what I ended up getting brought into that realm because I got exposed to a target that I had to do a recovery of. And the job was you go and kill this guy. You're going to cut out his heart and you're going to take this pacemaker off it, right? But I know what P238 means, and I know what the sign of radiation means, and I got exposed to a technology that I shouldn't have known about because that little battery pack is a spy tool because now you have something that's an unlimited battery, and all of these devices, they say we only put these out for about, 1,500 patients. No, there were tens of thousands of people that got these things, and they were used as an unlimited battery bank for people that were doing spooky spy stuff. And it was a way that they could power up devices, listening devices and other stuff from their body. And it opened up this entire world that involves transportation of radioactive materials and metamaterials. And I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing ever because to me, I saw the potential for unlimited power and unlimited energy available to the masses. And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I want this to go to everyone. And then I run into this whole cabal, a totally different wall of people that have a very protected interest to not allow any forms of what is called a highly disruptive technology to come to the market. And that's when I started finding out some pieces of maybe some of these targets I'm going after aren't the bad guy who's hurting children like they're giving me in the folder. And I start digging back into these things. And I start discovering that a lot of these guys are part of this advanced weapons and advanced energy propulsion systems. And that a lot of these guys are scientists. And a lot of these guys are researching stuff that are found stuff or have products that they're not supposed to have. And they want those people taken out. And then they give a kill guy, right, an asset, a field asset, a folder based off of what that person wants to go fight. And that's what you receive. So you think you're going to go kill this entire family because, they're doing all this horrible, horrific criminal stuff. And you come to find out later on, that's not what they're doing at all. They stumbled onto a way of splitting hydrogen that most people aren't used to. And so this is what launched me into this road of thinking I'm on the good side and then discovering simultaneously that I am an arm of the empire of evil. And it created this just shattering of my hopes because when I was 17 years old, as a junior in high school, I got emancipated to the United States government. My family, my mother very reluctantly signed the transfer of guardianship. My father was all for it, but he knew a lot more behind the scenes than she did.
Oh, okay. I don't want to take you off your track, but this is something I did forget to ask in the first segment. I do want to ask now before we go any further. Talked a lot about your dad. Talked about your mom coming from a more Catholic background. I think you said Jesuit. Where is she in all this? Does she, and you just said she didn't understand the extent. Is she in full aware of what you are, who you are, what you were doing, your sisters? What is your mom's play in all this?
Do you know what a Stepford wife is? Like the original?
No.
It's a robot. I love the woman that raised me. But she was a fragmented, very fragile survivor, desperately trying to cling to life and to try to raise a family in an environment with perverts all around her. She was a mess a lot of the time. And my dad was like the super good, go get everything done, the hero in the story for me all my life growing up. And he could never do wrong. And my mom, to me, was like psycho, just crazy. mean, angry, miserable all the time. But she was very shattered because she was raised by my grandfather, who was the splitter. He's the splitter for the family. Her dad is the guy who technically, scientifically shatters children for other people's families. He abuses them and programs them. That's what he does. That's his business. And he's been doing that forever. And so he would take in other children too. Like my mom's got sisters that disappeared. She's got a horrific background that never saw the light of day because she was married to a handler, And so she got an arranged marriage in a really bad way. And I'm a child that she was forced to suddenly raise, So she had a great love for me. I was the only boy in the house, but there was a distance between her and I that was never capable of being refilled because she was not mom to me ever. And so, but towards the end of the life, when I started figuring out a lot of this stuff, and I understood my mom was much more of a victim than I had originally understood later on in life. And that I could finally see so many times where she tried to mitigate the damage. But at the end of the day, she's still part of that family. And she's still online, if that makes sense. And I'm going to go out here and fight my war. And I'm going to try to shout it from the rooftops and try to call people to freedom and deliverance, no matter what it takes. And they can do whatever the heck they want. But I went and warned them. I offered them repentance. I offered them forgiveness. And they chose to fight. And I'm like an unbelievable fighter. So that's what they got, But I don't have any interactions with any of them whatsoever by any stretch of the means, They're never going to see my children, There's no stinking way you're ever coming around any of my family. I will burn this earth to the ground to protect my family from any of those perverts ever coming near them again. You know what I'm saying? Like they know nothing of what a real man is or a real shepherd is of his flock. But I learned some ways of guarding people and protecting people. And I found out real quickly that it's a game of millimeters. And at the end of it, I don't want anything to do with them as long as they're still out there playing their racket of child exploitation and adopting children out of the foster care system that are sexually abused so that they can easily get access. And I don't want anything to do with their perversion and their disgusting blood money. I don't want it. And I utterly reject the ways of my father. I inherited lies and vanity and falsehood from him. And I'm clinging to the ways of righteousness now because that's what fathers should do. Fathers should lay their lives down for their sons. Yeah. Fathers should lay their lives down for their sons, but I'm laying my life down for my children right stinking now every day. I lay down everything I want to do and who I want to be and how I want to live. I lay it down for them so they can know life. So my child can have chickens because she wants chickens. And I'm sitting there staring at this chicken with her. She has no idea that I'm thinking about something so horrific. The summers are really hard because that's when the Jasons operate. Like they gather together in these months in the summer. And so so much of the work that I did in the military, I get deployed. My first, I go to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And Fort Knox, Kentucky is the home of the Psy Warrior projects. This is where they do the First Earth Battalion and all this stuff where they started bringing in the occult in a very strategic way and starting to try to weaponize soldiers spiritually in a sense, or psychically, they'll call it. So I get assigned to a totally different handler in there. And I'm tier 1, top performer, top. Anyways, you just go through basic training. It's what it is. But that's where the injections came in. That's where the volunteering for these other programs just kicked off like crazy. I'm sorry, man. It was just, I was sitting there with my daughter. I got twin babies at home. And it's just a freak show. We didn't know we were going to have twins till my wife gave birth, and I caught my son in a copper bowl. I thought I was going to catch a placenta, and I caught a baby boy. That was a year ago. So I'm still in a bit of the wow, we have a family of 6. Okay. We're really into this dad thing now, man.
This was unexpected.
Oh, it was savage. It was amazing. My wife is amazing. My wife is amazing. My woman is amazing, man. But she is, dude. I know my wife. I was in the tub with her when she gave birth to our first child. I was tried to catch my second one. I missed. Full disclosure. I was shocked how fast a child can come out of a woman. First one took 3 days. Second one took about 30 minutes, and I was like, wow. Yeah. Midwife caught her. She didn't bungee jump. But I had these twins. It's a real thing, bro. This dad life's not a joke. Anyways, we want to do all things all in, all the way natural, right? We're dedicated psychopathic level intense people. And we're going to have a home birth. No midwife, bro. We're who's going to be with us? It's going to be great.
So you literally Okay,
In an Airbnb, bro. We didn't tell the owners.
What?
We later did because it came out, it happened.
Yeah,
I'm glad I cleared the rug out, I'm like, I know how to clean up a blood scene, so we scrubbed it beforehand.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's my
phone.
You know what's funny is that I'm getting a phone call from Joe here. But it's funny because I was literally just thinking about Joe because visually you remind me of Joe. It's similar length beard and the hair. Like that's him right there. So, yeah. So what were we just talking?
I was having this realization. I was sitting out there by this chicken coop with my daughter, man, and it's hot. And like when I feel the heat, man, I feel the heat, and it's like it triggers a lot for me because I grew up in the desert, and a lot of it's the worst stuff. And we're literally like a few days away from the solstice. Those of you guys that are watching this now or later, and it's a hard season for me, man. I watched a lot of people die horrifically in this season throughout my life. And I also had very wonderful, victorious moments at this time of year. But it's really hard to articulate that to your little 4-year-old when she's like trying to pick up chicken eggs and she's cracking eggs and you're just trying to be a dad. But like, it's still there. It's not like my mind doesn't lose much. It's all there, and it's just, there's a lot of guys sitting here trying to figure out how to navigate fatherhood with that burden on their shoulders. There's a lot of people who killed their battle buddy in combat on purpose because he was screaming bloody murder and lost his mind and was going to give away their position, and they had to kill him. There's a lot of guys that do a lot of horrific things, a lot of gals that do a lot of horrific things that they never talk about again, and it ruins their lives. And I am 100% convinced that freedom comes through the power of confession. And it doesn't have to be to a priest guy, creepy manipulator in an office somewhere. The power of confession is the source of deliverance. I'm 100% certain of it. That is what has set me free. And so that's why I have set my mind to tell these things that have been so costly for so many, for so long. And you know what? I believe the Father can protect me however he sees fit. I am at his disposal. And I trust he's a good father. And you know what? That's why I talk about this stuff, because there's a lot of guys who get recruited into these projects and they think they're going into a secret scientific group. And that sounds great. They're like, I finally get to do the research that I want to do, and I finally have the tools to do it. And then they develop something that is 100% evil, and they have no say in the matter. And I just wanted, like you and I were talking earlier, I want autonomy. At the end of the day, I didn't know what it was I was really looking for throughout all of my life, but I was looking for freedom. I was on a quest for freedom. I thought vengeance was the gates of freedom. And I learned, or the key to unlock the gates of freedom. But I learned that vengeance was a tool that can be manipulated by the guys who are your prison boss, right? Just as easily as it can by the guy who's trying to save the world. And when I got into Fort Lee, Virginia, which is where my advanced training took place, I had a family member as my drill sergeant. Okay, and this is a Reynolds family, and he's an East Coast Empire guy. And that's when I finally got the opportunity to join up with the Lobos and this team that had happened earlier on, who had shown me this cool way of doing bag and tag 'em. And I finally got this opportunity to join this team. And these are guys, I was not a Delta Force operator. I was not on paper anywhere a Special Forces guy. I was a nobody nomad in the Army, and I bounced around from unit to unit, and that was the cover that you use, because you don't want to put it on your resume, spy.
Yeah.
But you need to know that about 8 out of every 10 military units in our United States military is infested with spies. So if you know that, you better figure out a way to build your own spy army to deal with that. And that's why the Jason projects on that side of it existed, because that's the scientific realm of a lot of corporate espionage. And then you have all these guys that you need, which are field assets, which are the guys that are the door kickers. And so they bridge that gap out there in Virginia. And I started doing wet work for the United States military.
What does that mean, wet work?
Strategic eliminations, killing people. Killing people, and like we talked about earlier, some of that is accidental deaths, looking like accidental deaths, just overdosing with too much potassium so it looks like a heart attack. Something that's not generally detectable. You're injecting people between their toes and smothering their faces, there's a lot of that. Then there's a lot of stuff that just involves good old fashioned blade work. And that's all that was my thing. I didn't care to kill people from far away. I wanted to be on them. You know, I understood the intimacy of killing is 100% an intimate act. And when you take a life, there's nothing, the act of having relations with your wife is an act where it can create life, and taking a life is just as intimate. And you get to know people very authentically in their final moments of life, and you can find out all kinds of things about people. And that's what I started doing a lot of, very full time, all at once when I got out to Fort Lee, Virginia. And that involved a lot of the areas in Norfolk and Washington, D.C. and the Beltway. And some of that stuff popped up on papers, you know, and that's when things got real scary, real fast, because I started realizing that a lot of these things, I think I'm going after a guy who abuses children, doing a ring roundup. And you go into a house, man, that has children on parade. And you're there in a suit and tie, and you've got to look the part and act the part. And you've got these bleed throughs of what's the past and what's the present. And now I'm the guy with the gun. And now I get to have some fun, you know, but you're not allowed to. And this is the perversion inside the United States military, is that what you don't know is that you're coming in there to take out somebody, and you're in a house full of these perverts, like,
but they're not the mission.
Full of them. And you have to masquerade like one of them, and you're not allowed to touch any of them. And you're looking at commanders of field battalions. You're looking at politicians who you can identify on the television. You're looking at people that are readily recognized public figures, and you're not allowed to touch any of them. And this is what, that broke me. This one mission going after this guy called Mr. Blue, and I've shared this before publicly, so whatever. But like that estate, infiltrating that estate and getting into that building and seeing the people in this house who have built a room, concrete, the entire room, floor to ceiling, floor to stadium seating and drain panels, and to see millions of dollars of infrastructure put in for this, that was new to me. I'd seen a lot of home economics versions of this stuff. I had never seen it scaled up to someone's like massive estate style version of it. And then seeing people that have all the ability to shut this stuff down, they're there. And that just ruined me, because I'm going in to do this extraction on a guy. I have to bring him out alive. And he is, can I say it now? Like, can I be more authentic on this one? He is skinning a boy alive with a bone grafting tool when I found him. And then I have to get that guy out. So I have to give him a certain type of drug, which is derived from a certain tree in Brazil that makes somebody do anything you want. And he walks out of there as my best friend, and I drive his car out. And then I take him back to a house where we do all the dirty to get out our information that we want to. I turn him over to a guy that does that for a living, who has his big why, because somebody did that to his children when he was young. Game on. And so that's all he does. He just interrogates people. That's what we say. Tortures them. Tortures that man to death. That was my job at 18 years old. That's what I was doing, my summer vacation. And then I'm supposed to go out to this normal world. And you see these people, like, I see their faces, and then I see them being aggrandized as the heroes of the world. These are rulers. These are the best people that are in charge of the counter child trafficking networks. And I'm like, these are the perverts of justice, man. And it tweaked me bad, because once I'll dig, and I'm going to dig until I find the answers. I have an insatiable need to know, and I'm going to find out the absolute root of a man. I will find out the deepest, darkest secrets of every person I ever interact with. And I am 100% certain whether or not that person is who they say they are, or if there's something else there. And once I find that out, and if you are inconsistent with what you portray to the masses and who you are at the heart of yourself, I'm going to find it out, man, because that's duplicity, and that's hypocrisy, and that's the leaven of the Pharisees that is destructive to all nation states. That's exactly the tactics that have destroyed empires forever, is subterfuge from the inside. And that's what we got inside this house of cards, is a nest full of these disgusting serpent eaters. And you know what? I couldn't stand it, and I hated it so bad, man. And I started disobeying. And as soon as you get an asset out of containment, I was at Fort Bragg briefly for a rendezvous. I was driven from Fort Lee, Virginia down there. They have these cheap taxis that they drove me down there. And I saw some of these generals who were in charge of these special operations projects, and I was disrespectful to one of them, and that was it. They pulled me off the projects. He nuked me off the team so fast. General McChrystal. He was in charge of Special Operations Command at the time. I had no idea who he was. He was in a suit. I didn't know who the heck this guy was. I was watching the little festival of guys fighting each other in the pit. This is how they do like X-Class. They want to test out a weapon system. They want to test it out between two guys. They'll make them fight to the death. And then they try to prove which one's better, you know? And I've been doing that since I was a child. These sycophantic, like this is a pit fight. These guys are like the most powerful people in the world, and you're going to do this kind of crap? Like, what a wasted life, you know? I utterly loathe it. And I was so enraged after the fact, and I disrespected him, and I shrugged him off, and I basically snarled at him. And they're like, you're done. You're never on the teams again. You're never going to touch any of this. They washed me out of the military so fast, made my head spin, bro. Because as soon as you show a guy like this is not controllable, you either kill them instantly or you get the heck away from them as fast as you can. And that's what happened, man. They washed me out so hard, so fast, man, and tried to eradicate me out of that industry.
Wow. Holy crap. I'm getting choked up here. Wow. Okay. So you're going to these places and you can't do what you want to do. And even like, it sounds like even like your target, like I think you called him Mr. Blue. You probably couldn't even do what you wanted to do to him. And you had to just keep him alive, be on mission. So your time in the military, how long did that last?
On paper, it was 2 years.
2 years?
A lot longer before that. I started around 12 years old. I started doing stuff with him.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. In Colorado Springs.
Gotcha.
That was more with the Air Force, though. The Air Force is where I was originally groomed to really go into. And outside the United States Air Force. My family, let's say it this way. My family lives really close to the United States Air Force Academy property. And you can get into their property from boulders and underground tunnels that are accessible on Rampart Range Road, which is a publicly accessed road. So a lot of field assets who aren't allowed to go through a military checkpoint because there's documentation, they come in through the back of the gate, okay? There's ways of getting into military bases that only assets would know because they can't ever have their cover blown. They're deep cover spies, you know? You got to come report back to command every so often. And so that's how I started in that units, was seeing the behind the scenes, the Air Force there, the underground infrastructure. And that's where a lot of that interactions took place there, was out in Colorado Springs. But my handler at the time, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Lonnie Weaver, was one of the heads at NORAD, like you've talked about earlier. And he was the head of the Boy Scout troop and the pack. And so he was placed there to be able to be around all the boys and the children. And he had some of his boys that were part of his work, you know, for the military. And that's how they groom up people. None of these people that are empowered, they don't just start overnight one day when they're 18. You raise psychopaths from day one, period. That's how these people do it, man. That's why they're where they are and why you're not. Because they've been willing to do a whole lot of horrific things early on. And they're going to continue to do it until the day that they die unless they have a massive intervention.
Man. That's crazy. All right, so your life mission now has been pretty well established. How do you still have contact with anybody from those days in the military? Do they understand where you're at in life right now?
I have some contact, yeah, but they're sleeper cells.
Yeah,
they're still. My position in that team. These are lone wolves, right? That's a real phrase for a reason. We call them lone wolf assassins for a reason. These are guys that live a very unentangled life, but very anonymous background noise lifestyle on purpose. Many of them are still online, meaning they'll still pick up a phone and they'll still get an order and they're still going to go out and do what they do. Not all of them. Some of them are out of the teams, are out offline, and they're trying to put their lives back together. Because what happens, most people don't understand, is like when they give a real burn in it, like when they really burn somebody out, a lot of it is psychological, and they send harassment teams And they send, they make you a targeted individual. They make your life hell until you go crazy and kill yourself. That's the main goal. Like, of some of the guys that were in my team in the same month, almost in the same week, almost all of them killed themselves. And that's by design. Like, this is Omega program where they're like stimulating specific areas of your brain as they condition you to kill yourself. This is why so many of these mass shooters and so many of these guys out there who go on these mass killing sprees kill themselves at the end, because that's a programming script that's been put in there. James Holmes is a good example of it. James Holmes, the Batman killer that got all this press coverage and stuff out in Colorado. He was a brilliant neuroscientist. The guy who went down that killing, who they showed this character, weird red hair like the Joker, painted like the Joker. He's a neuroscientist who's getting programming by the former head of psychiatry from the Central Intelligence Agency. That's his doctor. Runs a mind control game on that guy and makes him go out and do this mass killing event. And when they pull over and they find him at the end, he's trying to kill himself with a pistol over and over and over and over and incapable of doing it. He's in a mind control script. There's a lot of guys that are like that, a lot of people that are like that, who don't know that's exactly what they've been programmed to do throughout their life. And it's just on the other side of a cognizant wall, an amnesic barrier, and they can't recall that stuff. The heart for me is to try to help them understand a way of putting the pieces back together and being able to get free from that influence, because there is a black awakening that's being prepared where these sleeper cells are going to get activated. And they're going to go hunt, and they're going to go eliminate people that are what's called critical infrastructure, law enforcement predominantly, firefighters, trash service, because when you stop all the trash, you can make a city fall apart really fast. Like, this is who they're going to go out and they're going to assassinate all of these people who are on kill lists that the asset doesn't even know of. But it's going to kick off one day, and they're going to go out and they're going to hunt and cause chaos for a few days generally. Absolute chaos until the streets are running with absolute monsters out there. And then they're going to turn off, and they're going to wake up with blood all over their fingernails and wake up with chunks of people in their car, like I've had to wake up to. And you have to try to figure out what the heck just happened, because you don't know. And there's soft conditioning people with movies and TV shows to try to understand this is reality. Like you mentioned earlier with the Jason Bourne series, that is a conditioning and a programming script to keep Jasons online and to keep them reinforced. But on the other side of it, it also can kick people awake when you suddenly see that and you start to recognize it. Or if you have a spouse who's keen enough to actually have a relationship with you that can point these things out in you and be like, honey, I know you, but I don't know who this is. And that's a real honest conversation a lot of wives and husbands have to have that most of them aren't capable of, because they don't have this framework like we're talking about. They've never heard of dissociative identity disorder. They don't know about split personalities. But these are the realities that so many of these people have, and they get misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, and they get shoved on drugs, or they get shoved in psych wards. But you know what? It's the most common misdiagnosis in the United States today is dissociative identity disorder. They're like, it's super rare. I took psychology, man. I got my degree in it from one of the best universities in the entire country. And they're like, yeah, it's out there. It's just not that common. I'm like, you start to dig into the actual research, and you're like, no, this is like 6 to 10% of the population. That's a totally different thing than what they're talking about. And then that launches you into this whole world of trying to heal people that have this and trying to recover people that have this absolute brokenness and they need healing. And that's why so many people are the walking wounded, is because they don't know they have this trauma that's been compartmentalized, and they need to get expression of that. They need to have freedom of that. And so much of my desire is to just, I'll stand here, man, and take all the gunshots of the mockings and the criticisms and whatever. I'll stand here and I'll continue to light a beacon of hope for everyone that's out there and try to tell them, listen, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you've done or no matter what you've done or has been done to you, there is an opportunity of life and hope and of freedom and of restoration that's waiting for you. And I have found that in the Messiah. I have found that in his word, but I've also found that in people. As much as I hated people in my youth, and as much as I wanted to burn the world down, man, I was working my way to try to get access into nuclear weapons technology when I was young, man, because I literally was like, I just want to get on board the Ohio class weapon system. I'm like, we can just go ahead and end this thing right now. Like, that's where I was working into. But then I was like, no, man, we got to engineer people's freedom. And that is what's led me on this journey of being like, listen, we got to call people back to the ancient ways. We got to be fathers that actually raise our families and don't divorce our children and shove them in school every day. We need to be the ones who bring them alongside us, resurrect the trades where fathers had their sons with them. That was normalized. They made child labor laws to murder the fathers ability to raise their sons alongside them. They've eradicated women from raising their children so they could tax them and brainwash their children to become proper cult followers of whatever version of the government or the societal norms that they wanted at the time or the corporations needed at the time. But we have a duty to try to raise up another generation that understands how to be competent and capable, fully autonomous adults. We need people that are extremely capable, and that can happen when your child is very young. So I try to show people opportunities of how you can raise your family outside of the system and raise them up to be very, very capable and exceptional children.
Don't stop talking right there. I'm just sitting here listening. Okay. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. Because I wrote down some things here. The Black Awakening. Can you define that again for me? That those are those people that are like sleeper cells and they're going to be woke up? Is that like a lot of military people, or is that like in general?
No, soccer mom people.
Really?
You betcha, bro.
Okay.
A lot of them are not military people. You'll have them in the military, right? You want them placed in specific locations and in chains of command so that they can have access to certain biological agents or certain types of weaponry or arsenals. But a lot of them are just going to be what you and I would consider as normies, just normal people that to their friends and their family, they're just another neighbor next door who lives on the other side of the white picket fence that goes to church on Sunday, or, that kind of person is the ideal for your sleeper cells. You want people that are blending in, period. But Russ Disdart's book, which is called The Black Awakening, goes into, it's like an 800-page book. It's a dissertation about the history of these families, bloodlines, and people that have worked very diligently, in particular during the Third Reich, where so much of this information was systematized, where they took what had been occult knowledge about splitting realms and programming and all of those other things we talked about earlier, and they scientifically methodized it. And that's what so much of what Dr. Green, as he's often called, or Josef Mengele, that's what a lot of his experimental projects and research was, to create a spy that didn't know they were a spy. And a Manchurian candidate is another way of saying it. That research that was pioneered in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s is led to generations of men and women who were subjects to that originally by the United States military and the government and all of these agencies from the Nazis that we brought over here to establish and found these groups. They came here because they had these documents. They had the papers. That's what the scientists used as their passcode to get through the Nuremberg trials. They're like, yeah, I know. I killed 180,000 people allegedly in here, but I have all this research. And they're like, no hangman's noose for you. Why don't you just come on into the Catholic Intelligence Agency right here? They're like, come join us here at NASA. You'll do great.
We're going to reform you.
We're going to reform you. We'll put you into JPL. It'll be great. There's other occultists in there just like you. And so that those parents, those moms and dads in the 30s, 40s, and 50s had children, and they do the same thing to them unknowingly. They create compartmentalized, fragmented, polyfragmented, super intelligent children that are programmed. It's a default. And if not, their handlers who are with the family and assigned to them are going to do it. And so this is how we create a generational increase of the size of the underground army. And that's what's been taking place since the 50s. And this is why you can follow. You've had a psychiatrist on too that gives an excellent breakdown on psychiatric disorders and the demonic and understanding schizophrenia.
Dr. Laura Sanger?
Yes. But there's this prevalence, if you start to study the prevalence in the history of asylums, in insane asylums, the rates of DID, or what was called multiple personality disorder, people starting to come in with all these multiple personalities. And it increased exponentially every generation as there was more of these families that had been brought into that world and are in these projects. And so today we're looking at 10 to 30 million people just right here in this region that have been subjects to this same polyfragmented mind control.
What region?
I'm talking about like east of the Mississippi region.
Really?
You betcha, bro. All day and night.
They don't even know?
Parts of them know. But their front half is oblivious. But there's telltale signs. A lot of people just don't know until you suddenly point out the facts to them about like you can hand somebody the descriptions of the symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, and you will watch people, their eyes will roll around in their head. They'll start shaking internally and twitching. You'll see this programming start shutting off and all kinds of weird hypnotic things start coming out of their mouths. You'll see this happen with people because they've made it basically anonymous. You can't find out information about this stuff. They don't want people to know that because once you start to put in the place that, no, there could be subset programmed personalities, that unlocks the whole thing. Like with the Nephilim earlier, you're talking about that being one of those keys that unlocked the understanding to so much of this paradigm. Well, so is split minds and multiple personalities. That's the big giant secret that they don't want anybody really looking into. They want you to think of, oh, some movie, Fight Club. That's the DID thing. They don't want you to understand how weaponized it is. That's what Jason Bourne is, right? He's a split personality who wakes up out of programming on a mission. That's what happens to people. They go offline and they suddenly wake up and they went from sleeping in their bed next to their husband in middle income America and they're sitting somewhere in Nicaragua and they've just strangled a man to death and his children are watching them. Like, this is reality. I have phone calls with guys that this is still what they do. And this is still what they're trying to do because they come home a different person and their marriages are falling apart and they have no idea how to get out of this. But this is how it was designed to be. There is a Fourth Reich. There is another kingdom that operates inside this country that is trying to subvert and in treasonous methods to destroy it from within, because it's an incredibly hard nut to crack. The United States, geographically alone, is a nightmare to try to invade. So you better send in a subterfuge force. You better send in people from within. And that's the specialty of so much of these occult societies. They go in and they use influence from behind the scenes to take over an ideology and completely turn it to suit their purposes. And that's what they've been raising. We've given them access to raise our children for 75 years, about 125 years. And so what do we have from it? A whole bunch of psychopathic children that are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that this model of whatever version they're saying is normal families, children, men, woman, identity, sexuality, all of it, they're going to follow that. And then you have the enforcers that are going to do that as well. And that's what a lot of these sleeper cells are, man. They're going to go out and cause chaos. They're going to go out and throw chains onto transformer lines. You know, they're going to go out, you can go to a hardware store and you can dismantle a city in a day. It's not that hard, bro. The critical infrastructure is not exactly protected. Not any of our cities are not hardened. I don't care what city you're talking about, bro. When we invaded Iraq, you know, like my drill sergeant went into Iraq before anybody ever heard anybody was going into Iraq. And he had orders to kill everything that was in a taxi. They didn't care what it was. They said, kill everything. Kill everything. And you know what he did? They destroyed all the infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants, power generation substations, hospitals. They literally destroyed them all. And he was like, in a day.
Jeez.
That's not hard to do with a guy or two that knows what they're doing. You know, that's what's like in the future, unless we figure out ways to try to wake people up on one side of the equation and expose this, because when survivors pop their heads up and start talking about this stuff, it's easy to isolate them and destroy their lives. And that's what's been effective. But the more people that are aware of this and the more we can have actual backup reinforcements of people to help survivors and people coming out of this, the more exposition that we can get, the more we can actually defeat that empire from within. And we can shut off that horrible program that they're trying to run on us all.
You mentioned earlier that, well, I mentioned it and you kind of like, I could tell something was going on in your head. But with this kind of stuff, you're talking about information warfare and that attracts certain types. I asked you if there's been an attempt on your life recently and you kind of just like, I could tell like something was going on. Is that like a recent thing, as in like real recent? And are you able to even share at all what's going on? Because I have a feeling that like what you talk about here and stuff is that kind of there's repercussions for that. Is that true?
There's consequences for every time I do stuff like this. Consequences that most people will never see, because I don't want people to know how much they shot me or my family. Shot. How bad we are banged up after their attempt. Does that make sense? Sometimes you don't want to know the enemy got their fire in, got their shot in. It's like we live a very public life to a lot of people, but there's stuff that happens to us behind the scenes that is horrific and brutal, and we bear it up in silence. We don't pick up a phone and call anybody because we don't want anybody to know that one got through the shield, you know? And I had one get really bad. This year's been hell. I've been busy with this weapon. Pen or the sword, bro. I had to pick. I use this little weapon of my voice to fight my war now. And it's a lot more effective. You can only kill one person at a time in a lot of ways, but you can reach a lot of people with this. And I started doing a lot of shows last summer, and I started doing shows with other guys that were still doing this business. And we're trying, I started connecting with other operators, and we started working together, and we started trying to do what we do, which is to gather intelligence and then build out, not hits, trying to find out ways that we can use these to get it out. There's a lot of guys that are not doing wet work anymore. They're doing media work, and we're trying to get the message out. But I started naming the names of some of those commanders, especially at Fort Bragg, and then it went bad. We were out in a place called Ozark, Missouri, in the Ozarks of Missouri. And I had done a big podcast with someone, and I mentioned the name of the commander who was in charge of that project, and started talking in details about what he does, because he is Obama's appointee. Like, this is the guy who got fast tracked literally after that, right up to the White House. And I had no idea who he was when I started sharing a lot of this stuff, because to me, he was just the SOCOM commander. I had no idea that he was still like stage one of the UN and Obama's entire team and a lot of these guys. He's like front and center for their agenda. And I got hit with something that it injected in my body. And it caused a horrific, violent reaction. And my entire body swelled up. And this ended up happening. I was out in town when it happened, and I drove back to the house, and I tried to just get into the spring water. Like, I found a lot of healing through cold water therapy. I'm really been into biohacking. I've been trying to find natural cures of everything. And I ended up running down into this creek where we had this cold immersion pond. My wife had been doing 40 days of cold plunging, trying to heal her body from this mold that she almost died from. And I just literally dove into the water. And when I got into the water, my face swelled up, my lips swelled up, my head swelled up, my arms, like I had a clear airway, but my whole body swelled up to where I felt like my skin was going to explode. And I came running back up to the house we were at. We were living in a barn. Let me just put it this way. I forget all these contexts for people. I was living in a barn.
Be real with you for a second. It was a barn.
It was a barn. It was a big barn, but I was in a little tiny part on the side of the barn. And I come running up, and I see my wife sitting on this little porch swing. It's all beautiful, romantic. It's like a wedding venue. It's so beautiful. And I'm like trying to tell her, help. You know, my tongue was so swollen up. And she looked up at me, and my daughters, Naomi and Jubilee, are sitting there, and her eyes are just like pinned. You know, she's a nurse. I married a nurse because I knew I was like a sick mess of a man, and I was going to need someone to patch me up 500,000 times. She's thrown stitches for me in the kitchen table, man, from karambit fights and stuff. But anyways, karambit knives, and she's a good woman, bro. And she sees me like that, and she's like, that, it's not good. And I'm starting to try to like go inside. I'm trying to tell her I want this supplement that's called Ganoderma lucidum, red reishi mushroom. Ganoderma suge is around here, local more so, but it's a super inflammatory mushroom that you can take, and it's incredibly good. And I was trying to tell her like, I'm like losing speech as I'm trying to say this, and then I just having this overwhelming shakes. And I try to go back up into the house, and I collapse on the deck, and I just start puking my guts out, just violently heaving, uncontrollably puking, like my body's just retching everything out of me. And I have my 3-year-old daughter, Jubilee, who's just amazing, sweet, like this sweet purity of gentility. Like, she's just this gorgeous little child. I just love her so much. And she's on previous assassination attempt, the reason that I fought for life instead of giving in to the death. I was on the side of the highway bleeding out, and I wanted to see that child be born. I wanted to hear what she had to say to me. She was in my wife's womb at the time, and I just wanted to see what she had to say. I believe she had something to say that could help me heal, that could help save me, you know? And I was sitting there on that deck, man, and I was bad shape, and I knew it, and I was like, why the frick am I out here doing this stuff, you know? Who's here to back me up when I'm hurt, you know? And she starts crying, and she's scared. She's terrified, man. She's terrified. My other daughter's terrified because I can't even walk in the house to get it for myself. And she's like, Daddy, you know, and I hate that. She had to see that. I never want them to see me dying, You know what I mean? I won't die. I'm adamantly convinced at this point, man, they can't kill me. You can try everything you stinking want, bro, but you can't kill. Nobody can be killed if they're the servant of the Most High and he says it's not your time. You are unkillable until he says otherwise. But that was a scary moment, man. And that jacked me up pretty bad. My wife ended up getting in the house and getting me into the house because I'm like 80%, 90% naked. You know, I've ripped all my clothes off because I can't fit in them. And I think I'm going to choke to death from just the clothes that I'm in on. And I stumbled into the house, man. And I end up taking a whole bunch of activated charcoal and a bunch of that Ganoderma lucidum and a bunch of activated charcoal. And I was just shaking uncontrollably, like violent seizures. And she just laid me in the bed. And I ended up calling one of my friends. I couldn't talk, but he was a nutritionist, amazing nutritionist. And I'm like, I don't know what to do, you know? And he had given my wife this bath supplement thing for after her birth to help remineralize her body. It was called like a bath bomb or something like that. But it's all like super intense magnesium and salts, Dead Sea salts, and all this just mineral boost for the body. And he said on the phone, just get in the tub and throw that in there, man. And I did. I got in the tub and my wife put that in because I felt like my skin was on fire, like I was burning alive, and my skin was like puckering out, you know, like my insides were coming out. And I climbed into that tub, man, and I just got in the water and it finally cooled me down and it slowed this horrible process in my body, man. And I just laid in the water with just my nose out of that water, just trying to breathe. And man, I stayed in there for like 30 minutes and it just stopped. It stopped, man. And I came out of it. And, but that was, that's why you saw that look on my face, is because that's still there. My family has a lot of secondary trauma because of the work that I do here. My family suffers very silently behind the scenes because I'm still not a whole man. I'm not healed. I've got much of myself healed, but that doesn't mean like I've got lifetimes of pain and suffering stored up in this little body of mine that comes crawling out when I have a bad day. Mm-hmm. And boy, there are a lot of bad days in farming. And there's a lot of bad days in raising children. There's a lot of bad days when you work a regular job and it comes and kicks your teeth in. But you know what? I would rather lay down my life on the mission field for these brothers and sisters of mine that I may not see, but I want them to know that it's all worth it. And I'd lay my life down for them because they're my friends and I love them. And I got to learn the love of people. I've gotten to learn I love people. I hate the evil they do. But I have learned to love people tremendously, that the vast majority of people are marvelous and they just need to be given the opportunity to thrive, and they will.
You mentioned about working with other people. And I think the way you said it, I mean, it left me feeling like it was people that were in this kind of work as well. And you said some of them working in media. Are there like some working in media that people are recognizable, or is it more like, you know, in the background of the media?
Well, no, they have their own like channels and stuff like that too, you know, where they're putting out content and trying to break this thing down.
Are they like the big dog ones, or?
Not, I haven't had any of those guys, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Not yet. We'll see. But for now, a lot of them are swinging. They're swinging a mighty hammer from a small field, you know?
Because some of these guys that I see, like Sean Ryan, I look at Sean Ryan and I'm like, I feel like you know some stuff that you just don't talk about.
That's why he was CIA, bro. What do you think? Do you understand when somebody says they're a former CIA operator, what that means?
They're still CIA.
30-year contract to never say anything. Do you understand what that means?
So all right. No, I don't.
Okay, what that means is...
I
get it.
Logically get it, but I can't imagine, right?
So if they want to put a book out or anything else, they have to literally submit it to a organization that evaluates everything they publish and put out.
Even his podcast episodes?
Bro, you better understand that it's going to be a filtered... Well, I can't say specifically for every show and all of that. You're going to get a filtered message, though, if you got a guy who is still active promoter of the agencies. You get what I'm saying? I am not... I did work for the State Department at one point, bro. I do not affiliate with any of these people whatsoever because I found them to be rotten, disgusting, ruinous people, traitors to our country, and I don't want anything to do with them. I believe there's great people within there that are still trying to fight, but the vast majority of what these people have done has been radical evil, and they've advanced the evil agenda, period.
So, all right, let's use Ryan as an example. is it possible that he uses his show, like, let's say he, like, how do I say this? 'Cause I'm not trying to paint him as in a bad light.
I understand.
But is it possible that he uses his show, the guests he brings on, to say the things that he can't say?
Very possible. That's a brilliant tactic too. If you can get somebody else on and say their story that corroborates yours or is yours, that's a brilliant strategy. I don't think it's wrong that anybody that's still under a secrecy clause is trying to find a way to still get the truth out without losing their life or their pension. A lot of them, they're losing their pensions. A lot of these guys keep the secrets to the grave because that's what's paying the bills.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard. Like, I've never gone to the VA. Like, I gave up all of that. Like I told you earlier, they came back and took my signing bonus years into my marriage. They're like, oh, hey, honey, I guess the government's coming after me now because they don't want me doing any of this. So they want all their money back from me. Like, that, they have different strategies for silencing people. Like, I just chose to not go into any of their beneficiary systems whatsoever and to just fight for my life on my own. Like, I don't want to take a dime from any of you guys. Fine. Then I don't have to have this like feeling of reciprocity that, oh, you're paying this bill or you're doing this for me. I don't want any of that, man. I want autonomy.
Yeah,
that's what say that. Autonomy is far more powerful. I don't have I don't market anything. I don't sell. Like, I don't have advertisers or any of that stuff. I'm like, man, none of that. I say no to everything. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be a merchandiser of people. I don't want people to be paywalled behind anything for me. Listen, I am here to give the truth away to the best of my understanding and the things that I have found that have helped me and my family. I want to educate and equip people to live passionate and profound and abundant lives. That's what I want them to have, no matter what their background is. And you know what? There's guys who are out there trying to come out and talk about these things, and you know what? They can't. And having a guest on that can, that's a strategy of doing it. I don't know Sean Ryan specifically. I don't know Joe Rogan specifically, or any of these other guys that are out there kind of on the forefront of media, of who's getting promoted the most. But I know when somebody gets a media package and they are the famous one, that's another thing, because they're generally have an agenda behind that money that allows that empire to make it prosper. And that's the one that's always concerning, because I noticed that it's rarely people that are biblical literalists who are trying to raise people up and expose the wicked works of darkness. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. It's rarely those guys that get the big ticket to all the press coverage and 150 million views. And there's a reason that there's still a lot of controlled opposition.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I don't want to say anything bad about Sean, but if I remember correctly, he's not like he's been around very long. And I remember hearing him talk about recently how, he started his show and it was like there was no help. It was just him. And I'm like, was it just you? Because you blew up, man. You're huge, and I do wonder about the.
But he passes the rosary to people all the time.
What do you mean by that?
He passes rosaries as gifts to people all the time.
On the show?
Yeah, man. He's a Catholic through and through, which means he's an agent of the Pope, as far as I'm concerned. So that's exactly what I'm concerned with. When I watch him passing little trinkets back and forth, I pay very close attention when you give somebody a gift. And when you start giving somebody a gift that's been dipped in whatever version of holy water and desecrated water you want, I know what team you swing for. And I'm telling you, that's a team of adversaries, not assets.
And that's the thing. I was just going to say, I guess recently he's been talking, because I don't watch the show a whole lot, but recently he's been talking, I guess, pretty openly about how he's been finding faith in Christianity and things like that. And I do wonder sometimes if there's the controlled aspect of that, And
it's a big word, Christianity.
Yeah.
It covers a whole lot of bases.
But it hooks a big group of people that's just like, oh, praise God.
Recruitment.
Yeah.
Oh, praise God. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
He's a Christian now. He's perfect. We can trust him, and I'm careful with that because I don't know the man. I don't really want to hold, judgment on that kind of stuff. But I do know that there is that aspect that it's just like, America's a Christian nation. Most people don't really, they say they're Christian. They don't even know what that means. Like you ask them, it just simple, like for me, it'd be simple things as to, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? And they have no idea. I believe in God. Nope. No.
The demons do and shudder.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I just, when you were bringing some stuff, that stuff up, I was just wondering, I was just wondering about that. But, how often did you find yourself, I guess you said 12, right? So 12 to what, 20? 18? 18. So 12 to 18, how often did you find yourself in situations where, you're basically a hired gun to go to handle stuff? Was that a frequent thing? Because I mean, you were talking about also like the scientific side of things and trying to find, I forget how you said it, but basically, like you saw that these beasts had, like
Sapphire armor.
sapphire army. Thank you. And so, like, it seems like you were multi-pronged, and so like, how often did you find yourself on a mission versus maybe trying to figure out how to kill these monsters?
Very rarely given the opportunity to find out how to kill the monsters.
You're
That was the carrot.
Yeah.
That's the one they dangle all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To keep me motivated, keep going. But that was rarely what I got. I'd have little interactions with those guys, but that was the thing that hooked me, was just kept waiting for that day.
Are there people out there like you that would be the guy that would have more of that information that I should look around for?
I'm sure there's plenty.
I would really like to talk to them. Not that I'm not enjoying your conversation.
No, but there's a lot of other guys like that. There's a lot of other folks like that, man.
Okay.
This is a tip of a very different iceberg that most people bump into very often. Most of them don't bump into you. I mean, most of you will never bump into them. They'll bump into you occasionally if they want to. Just
Like
pay
you and
attention. Yeah. You're the first email I responded to in 6 weeks.
Really?
I was off comms, off grid completely 100%. Like my entire everything got fried where I was at. Like water pump, well pump, like everything, water heater, like communications equipment, everything got completely fried, man. I had no means of making calls or anything. And
was that an attack?
Oh yeah. Just a different kind, I think, but I worked harder, I'm over the enemy. That's a good sign that I'm on target, but to answer your question, I would say that the vast majority of what I was doing was more special kill team stuff, that's and a lot of that when you're young, you're baiting people, you're honeypotting them. So you're like a seductor, and then you're doing something to them, or you're recording it. And especially, I stayed very. When you castrate, this is the castrati, this is a Jesuit practice, been Catholic practice forever, still goes on today. They castrate young boys so that they'll have a high soprano voice and they'll look like prepubescent boys for much longer, and it makes them better for their desires. And that practice still goes on today. And so I had a very stunted development. So I looked very childish, very boyish for a long time in my life. And so that's favorable for missions like that when you need someone who blends in that field of view. People don't understand, like you use children as mules a lot in this underworld, like children traffic drugs and all kinds of illicit materials all the time because most people are unsuspecting of them. Well, the same thing with assassins, because it's a lot less likely that anyone's guard ever goes up and your target never becomes a hardened target because it's a little child, as opposed to it being a big, scary bodyguard looking guy who's coming to hunt you down. That guy.
Yeah.
But in Colorado, it was substantive, there was a lot of it, but there was a lot more out here in the East Coast. The military is like expedites their work. They'll stack them up for you. You just go from one to another, to another, to another, to another, till you lose your mind.
A lot more out in the East Coast. Is that because DC's out here?
I just think there's a lot older establishments. I don't know about DC. That's one thing. That's a place. Like the military is so much more than any. People think that DC is the capital. They have no idea what Norfolk, Virginia is. Norfolk, Virginia runs the world. That's our United States naval superpower. That's their headquarter base. That is a place where all our top secret nuclear weapons, like we talked about, whatever version of nuclear weapons you want to talk about now, but I could go there too. Thank you for all those guys that threw that out there about nukes. But that's where our weapon systems that are based on submarines are housed. So it's some of the most guarded and secretive places in the entire country is right through there. So that center of the country is one of the most heavily defended, but also heavily surveilled by spies of anywhere else in the country. And that's where I kind of niched myself into, was this form of tradecraft, where you can collect and gather intelligence and make strategic eliminations. That once you get into that vein, you're not just as like a pleasure boy anymore. And you start to be a man into that field. And there's just a lot more work out there. There's a lot more spooky stuff happening by spies out there.
And that's where it kind of comes back to what we were talking about in the pre-show, because I forget what the term was that you said. You said a term earlier in the pre-show.
Special kill teams.
Special kill teams. And I was kind of taken back that it sounds like now that the focus was here stateside than anything else. Because like when I think about special kill teams, I think, they're going over to, Afghanistan or something like that, taking care of business. not talking about American citizens and things like that, but that was a heavy focus.
That was the predominant focus, is stateside. That's where our corporations are. Like, who makes our bombs? That's an important guy.
Mm.
You know, who's the guy who has access to the R&D at Raytheon? That's an important person. Well, if I want to find out what they're doing, I would send a spy in there to seduce him or recruit him. And like this, we forget this thing, like that we're not at war with other places than other people that have other interests other than ours. And it's most of them. It's like there's other religions, like just cults. Like you could go down a Scientology cult and how much they infiltrated and sent spies into the government. 500,000 people they sent into positions of knowing so they could infiltrate and extract information, right? This is just one cult. There's a lot of cults that happen inside the United States military. There's a lot of satanic cults in the military. Lots of them, and a lot of them are colonels. A lot of them are brigadier generals. Like, you got the heads of all these different freak show level cults out there who are 100% on the ideology of trying to bring about a Luciferian empire, and they're trying to position themselves in all of their little echelons into the positions where they could do a takeover from within. Like that's the core tenets of the Black Awakening that people are bumping into. But the amount of fratricide, soldiers killing other soldiers, and the amount of NGOs, non-government organizations, killing each other and doing espionage, it's nonstop. There's an underground wars and battles that happen that just don't get press coverage. And it's real easy to scrub that stuff when you have an entire media crew that you can deploy at any given time to scrub a scene. And that's where these places like the National Energy and Renewables Labs, that like people that transport radioactive materials and the people that are in charge of these things, they have teams that's what they do. If there's a radioactive spill of a nuclear weapon system, you're never going to see it. They don't care if it's a town of 30,000 people. The 30,000 town of people disappears overnight. Like, they will swallow cities, you know, and that's how they clean up business out there. Well, that's just scalable. And you know what? That's what a lot of this world really looks like underneath the covers of, oh yeah, I go and shop at Walmart and all. There's a whole other world of seedy stuff happening all the time.
Jeez, talk about whole other worlds. We hit on a little bit. Let's go into it a little bit though more. The underground military facilities, deep underground military bases, the DUMBs. I mean, that sounds like that's probably where the whole operation, it's not, the operation of all this stuff is not surface level, it's underground, where the monsters are, where the deals are made. Let's start off with the softball side. The Denver airport, is there an underground base there?
That's a big one, man.
Is it? I thought
Jesse Ventura. No, that's a big one. It's a big base, man. Yeah. You ever been out there?
I mean, I've been to the airport.
Gigantic.
I've been to the airport. Yeah.
I have never been underneath anything that's not publicly accessible there, so I can't speak from any firsthand knowledge about what's underneath Denver airport. They market it now as a reality, you know, on one side of the equation, but I know I've physically been inside deep underground military bases outside of Colorado Springs and Black Forest, Colorado, and in Woodland Park and Cascade and Green Mountain Falls and Manatee Springs and Cheyenne Mountain. And people that live out there, they're going to know these places. And Fountain, there's pockmarked honeycomb networks of tunnels. I drove from Black Forest, Colorado, all the way down to Fort Carson underground on one time. You know, like the infrastructure, you don't know you're underground always too. Let me just be real clear. It looks like 1950s United States military bases all do. The linoleum floors, lighting, hallways, tunnels. There's times you're in buildings and you don't know you've gone underground, but you're way underground and you don't realize it. There's a lot of people that work in a compartmentalized environment where they are a little bit underground of a basement of a building, not understanding that building accesses that underground. That building is a way that contractors or subcontractors can enter into an underground without everybody else in their employee's office knowing it. So they built out the cities to facilitate a war where nobody on the surface people knew that there was a government that ran underneath their feet. That's what when I say something like continuity of government, that's what I'm talking about. There's an entire second, none of you know their names. Entire rulers of our country, military, political, judiciary, every position you see on the surface has a replicant in the underworld. And their job is to take over the country in the event of a nuclear war, an event of a strategic disaster. That's their job. And they practice it and they spend hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars building the infrastructure. For decades, they've been doing this. So some of that's all you're tapping into. Beneath that, or sometimes adjacent to it, you have old world tunnel systems, ancient world tunnel systems of people that built it before. I believe other fallen ones and other creatures, in knowing the impending doom was on its way with the flood, tried to build out bunkers. There's some that tried to build out because they didn't.
Have you seen them?
The old tunnels? I've seen a few old tunnels, more so in the Southwest, in Arizona, in the Four Corners region. That area, I saw old world tunnels. Most of what I saw in Colorado, almost exclusively what I saw in Colorado, was New World stuff, 1950s and beyond, because that's when all the funding came in. And that's when they built it a lot. And it doesn't get remodeled all that often, if you can imagine.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard now to go in and do a lot of this stuff so quietly.
Yeah.
But Schriever Air Force Base and Peterson Air Force Base, that's what they were all built to do, was to survive. Cheyenne Mountain was a bunker, public bunker now, that's an entire city that sits on springs. The whole city inside of it is sitting on elevated springs to survive the concussive forces of a direct nuclear strike on this granite mountain of Cheyenne Mountain. That's what it was built for. That's where Space Command, NORAD, that tracks every object in the entire sky continually, that's where it was centered for all this time. And so it's a world that you can get into, but then inside there, it's all compartmentalized. And so that's why I can't say I know anything about DIA. That wasn't part of that for me at all. But like they were bringing in shiploads of people on one of these missions I went on when I was 13 years old. They had a C-130 that was loaded with a shipping container that was full of people, for Asian people. I have no idea what their ethnicity was, didn't recognize the dialect whatsoever. But that United States Air Force was running human trafficking operations out of Schriever Air Force Base. And I was tasked with going ahead and investigating it. And all they did was load them up and put them on a tractor trailer and ship them to somebody else. That was a takeover, I learned. Somebody wanted in on the piece of the meal. I wasn't there to kill everybody and to set the prisoners free. No, man. I was there to make sure to oversee a change of ownership. And that's the kind of stuff that just ruins your morality. It ruins you.
Yeah, that's scarring, especially at 13 years old. Real scarring. Is there, because you mentioned earlier about how those who are in the know the way to get in. You can't just walk into bases, and you mentioned about a public road in I think Colorado that is accessible to something. Is there ways? I'm asking for a friend. Are there
Great
ways
way to start a question? Are there ways of accessing the underworld? Yeah, man. Of course. There's always ways to access the underworld. You just got to learn their signs, their symbols, their languages in its own sense. Every treasure map's got to have some marking somewhere along the way to help you know where you're going.
Heavily guarded?
Not always.
Really?
Rarely so.
Really?
Passive surveillance, right? Passive protection is anonymity, right? I don't want to design something that looks like a fortified bunker. That's called passive protection. That in and of itself, you would overlook always. You can design geographical landscapes to where people never want to walk that way. Plant a whole bunch of blackberries and briars and poison ivy all over in that thing. And then you put it on an upward slope at an insane, frustrating, difficult, precipitous angle so that nobody wants to go up there and see what is that chunk of rock that looks a little discolored from the rest of the colors.
I just did that last week. I literally just did that last week. There was a big rock formation on a very steep incline, and I look around, I'm like, let's go. And we went because it looked like there was caves up there, and we climbed up there. It took us about 30 minutes to get up there. But the caves were pretty boring. But
still caves, man.
Yeah.
They may be boring today, but they probably weren't always boring.
Yeah.
And they may just be a closed entrance you don't know how to get past.
I know. So,
so that's the other side of it. Sometimes you walk into them and you don't know that you can keep going, but you definitely can.
Interesting.
That's the other side of it. A lot of people quit when they see a blocked over door, and they're like, "Oh, there's a bunch of rockers, rubbles falling in."
No
and
point
stuff.
in walking over there.
Yeah, that's the false entrance, So but out in Colorado in particular, that's where I spent a lot of my time. Like I would go I like mine tunnels. I like tunnels. To me, it's very cozy. It's safe. It's familiar. It's comparative. I love it, man. And at the same time, I'll be honest, I was digging all the cryptid stuff out in Colorado like crazy because I was like, game on, bro. I'm like, these are the creatures of the night. I know how to call them. They'll come to me. That's a bad idea.
We need to get back to that.
Bro, because my wife and I had a crazy encounter. I hope to bring her someday so she and I can tell the story of what happened out there. No, bro. It's a big deal to bring a family of 6. Just let me tell you. I got tiny, tiny, tiny tots, bro. It's savage when they go long distance.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm a different person when dad's around. You got to be dad too.
I believe it.
There's still poop explosions. There's still a reality of like, I have to change the diaper. But I would say this for those that are trying to, I don't know how to say this. I'm going to tell you.
Hold on. Before you go there to calling and stuff, you were going somewhere else. You said you were digging the cryptid stuff, and you're out in Colorado going that.
Bro, I was squatch hunting. Okay. I'll just put it this way. I was cryptid hunting. I won't tell the whole story without her though, because she's a huge part of it, and it's epic. But I got
no, I don't want to hear this part. We were just talking about something. You were out in Colorado.
This
right?
is out in Colorado.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
This is all out in Colorado. But I would go explore old abandoned tunnels, right?
Okay.
Because on one side of it, I can call to these things and they'll come out. Okay, let me just say it that way, right? You can learn how to talk to them. Now, I don't suggest this. I don't recommend this whatsoever to any of you. I'm just going to say it that way because they'll eat your lunch and they're terrifying. And if you don't know how to deal with the spirits of dread and fear and phobos and all the rest of this stuff and all the stuff that accompanies them, like most of them are parasitically infested. That's how I would say it. Like when you're dealing with some of the sons of the fallen, a lot of these are like the giants and stuff, the remnants of old, like they live in there too. And they know that if they come out there, people are going to murder them, period. So I do agree that yes, there can be good Nephilim. I would say that as a catch-all phrase, junct ortes phrase of dealing with hybrids. That just because they are a bloodline that's not 100% human, none of you guys are that eat GMOs 100% certainly. All of you are genetically altered freak shows. I'm just going to tell you right now, none of your children will ever be 100% people. Not any of you. I don't care how many of those things you don't take that they're trying to give you, but every time you eat their genetically augmented stuff, you're augmenting your DNA. So that's why I'm a farmer. Because I'm like, I don't want my freak show children to be a bunch of more X-Men. I'm already X-Men enough. I don't need any of that stuff in my children. I don't want any of them having laser beams, But like, I would go to these tunnels. Let me just tell you now, because I was all into Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, but the other one too, L.A. Marzulli on the Trail of the Nephilim. Like I was all in, bro. I went to their conferences all the time. Like these guys, I loved it because I love lost history and secret history. Well, he was doing these documentaries.
Which one? L.A.?
Yeah. Oh, L.A. Marzulli. He was doing on the Trail of the Nephilim. And I'm like, bro, I can find this stuff every day because this is in Arizona, in the Southwest, it's just high mountain deserts. Nothing goes away. Stuff will sit there. Like you out here east of the Mississippi, you put out some metal building, it's going to disappear. Mm-hmm. Like stuff, not out there. You can go out to the old mining camps and it's like they walked away yesterday. There's still stuff in pots and pans from when they walked away. Like it's unbelievable how preserved history is in the South, in the West. And that's a very different thing to what you guys experience if you live on the East Coast. You're not used to seeing petroglyphs everywhere. Yeah. Tom Dunn, that guy ended up coming back and we filmed a documentary. We went out to all these sites in Arizona before I published my book because I knew they were going to burn them all down. And he and I filmed this documentary. And when we were driving from Show Low, Lakeside, Arizona to back towards Flagstaff, there's this area called Holbrook. Ridiculous. Anyways, they got the blood. Oh no, I'm just gonna go there. As we're driving, I could just find this stuff in my sleep though. To me, it's like as automatic as breathing. I go out in the forest, I'm gonna find it. I go out in the forest, I can interact with this stuff. Well, I got this family now, so I gotta be real careful. You know what I'm saying? I've got to learn all this stuff. But I'm out there with Tom Dunn and I'm like, game on, bro. I'm in full covert mode. You know what I'm saying? Like I have the toolkits, all of them, because I'm like, Tom Dunn's a dude. He's a dude with tattoos who's like a podcaster. And he was with Russ Dizdar for years and worked alongside him and did this stuff. But bro, he's not a guy. You know what I'm saying? He's not a great man. And so I'm like, Tom's going to die if I don't be real careful with Tom because we're going into the neighborhoods. I'm going back to the sites where we buried bodies. Like I'm going to film at the spots where they crucified people, like it's brutal stuff. But as what
were you doing there? You were filming something?
Documentary.
You did a documentary?
Yeah. Snatched from the Flames. It's not out.
Oh, it's not.
Big, long, pregnant story with that one too, but we'll get there. It'll come out when it needs to come out.
Do you have it?
Of course.
But it's not allowed to be out right now?
There's some pieces of it that got jacked up on the media that are critical. And there's other copies that I'm getting.
From who?
That makes sense. People. Humans. Anyways,
are they humans?
That's a whole other thing.
Are they really humans?
I don't know. Not likely. Yeah, as far as I can
as long
tell.
as they can fill what you need.
They're totally oblivious. That's what they are. No, they're 100% oblivious people. They don't know anything about any of this stuff. They're just somebody that holds something. Does that make sense? That's a good dead man switch.
Okay.
There's somebody who's just a wonderful person, oblivious to all things. That's a great place to stash something.
Okay.
Anyways, tuck it away. But we're driving to Holbrook and we go to pull over because we both got to pee. And I'm like, dude, we should check out this little sandstone area where there's an old dry creek bed. And we go down there and there are petroglyphs on the walls of a giant serpent, horned serpent, eating people, chasing people, and people trying to kill it. And I'm like, see, Tom, this is the land of the dragon. I've been trying to tell you guys, this is the land of the dragon. You got to know what Chiblos is. You got to know what Quetzalcoatl is, the land of the plumed serpent. This is America. And I was like, this out there. You can find it everywhere. Like these 6-fingered like prints that are on the walls. Like this was everywhere out here too. It's just covered up. Like they're like, oh shucks, we're just going to build a dam here, you guys, and we're going to sink this whole city. I know you found a temple that's obviously far old and it's Egyptian. I'm sorry, but we're
literally happened right here.
That's
Do you know
100%
that?
in Tennessee. Yeah, man. Oh, bro,
Norris Dam?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm trying to drop it for you, bro. I'm trying to give you a soft serve.
Yeah. We hit that, like, because that's Norris Dam. They found Egyptian ruins and they just covered it up.
Like shucks, water is a really good thing to hide things with. Lots of it. And it's called the flood.
Yeah.
Yes, but the same thing out there, what they did is they augmented rivers and they created a lot of the canal system. And that's why like it's not the same look out there. But in Colorado, there's this old world architecture. And I'm talking megalithic. I'm talking cyclopean architecture. Stone monuments on pillars and stuff at 13, 14,000 feet up. That most people, like I said earlier, geography is a great insulator. Well, when you go into the back, there's a reason Rocky Mountain National Park is where it is to cover a lot of this up. The reason that the Great Smoky Mountain National Park is where it is to cover a lot of this up. Because you have certain areas where they're still allowed to live these other things. They're allowed to live, and that's a sacred guarded territory for them. That's why they're like, no camping out here outside of designated areas. You hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't want you bumping into one of these freak shows in the middle of the night because they're going to eat you.
Yeah, but that's what we have here in the Smokies. Like, there's areas that we're not allowed to fly drones.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what happened to, so like, this land is your land, this land is my land.
This land is their land.
Yeah, well, I fly drones anyways.
That's right, suckers. Bro. Build your own. Build your own. You know what I'm saying?
But I had the same theory about the Allegheny National Forest because it's like almost, I would say probably, I think 1/16 is too small, but 1/8 is too big. But it's a huge chunk of Pennsylvania, of the Allegheny National Forest. And we know that Raven Rock is a deep underground military base there. But I think that there's probably something out there in the forest as well that's underground, but maybe even the creatures. Anyways, continue. You're rolling.
But those national forests, man, that's what I do. Like when I want to go to an area, like I want to go find the high places. There's points where like my family practice a lot of geomancy, and they go to places and do ritual magic based off of the celestial alignment with the stars, and then they can talk to the fallen that way. And I know that other civilizations before us did the same thing, and their clues are megalithic architecture in predominance. And so, anyways, there's regions I started scouting on Google Earth and Google Maps. I'm looking for specific warnings and indicators. Anyways, my wife and I decided to go on this backpacking trip. We started backpacking. We ended up doing 35 different hikes across the Rocky Mountains. We hiked hundreds of miles. It was amazing. We were all in preppers at the time because I was ready to bug out to the mountains and dig into a tunnel. You know, I was like, baby, we're going underground. She's like, okay, you got it, I'll follow. She was great, man. She was like, can we have a cabin? I'm like, only if it backs a mine. She's like, okay, we can compromise. So seriously, she's great, man. But we went on this hike and I knew as we started hiking in, I started seeing the signs, you know, like if you guys you all Squatch, if you're Squatch people, you know some of these indicators, right? There's like twisted trees tied up in knots way high up, you know, they've got like stacked rocks in certain configurations and weird places. They leave these little like clues, and it's like a guy who hangs a no trespassing sign. That's what a lot of these things are. They're like, don't come here. You know what I'm saying? But I'm like, oh, I've got all the camera. I had the GoPro. I had all the stuff. I'm like, I'm going to make my own documentary. I'm like, LA's crushing it. I'm like, I should just put this stuff out. I'm like, honey, we should do what's called hidden in plain sight, where we'll go film all these cult places where they're sacrificing people and doing all this stuff. Like I can find it all. I can literally pull over on a side of a road, man, and crawl into a storm drain, and I'll find places they've been doing ritual sacrifice of people. I'm not kidding, man. You can find this stuff like you wouldn't believe if you've been born into it. Like it calls to you. Oh yeah, man. Like a lot of people live in these little underground spaces. It doesn't have to be much. Some of them, it's underneath the road to desecrate the roadway so that they can send spirits to kill somebody on that road place and cause car accidents. If you want to find out if something's been going on, if there's been a bunch of car accidents, lots of people die in one spot, yeah, go look underneath it and go trying to see if people have been desecrating it. I've got pictures from one area like that that's in Left-Hand Canyon, or a different area in Colorado, where we would always have these horrific experiences. Our child would start waking up screaming bloody murder every time we drove by this spot. And I was like, what is it? It was like a nail in the carpet I kept tripping on. I'm like, why is it every time we drive by there, we feel this horrible sense of oppression and darkness? And we ended up pulling over and climbing down. There's a big storm drain underneath it. And from the beginning of it, 4-lane highway, to the end of it was covered in pentagrams. Beautiful artwork wise. And then the clown, the demonized clown, and a contrast, all these demons and creatures and ghouls and all this occult stuff, sigil magic, all these different invocations. But then on it was a massive scroll painted. And it had an oath on it about killing anyone who was a righteous person. May they die and be destroyed and blotted out from this place as they drive over here. It was this massive curse against anyone that drove over this place. This is why we pray. We ask the Father to forgive the sins committed on the roadways, the railroad tracks, the parks, the waterways, the open spaces, any place where the foot of the sole of my shoe or the tires of my vehicle tread, and to forgive the sins of any individuals or groups who've adopted these places. Because these folks will use that kind of desecration to kill people and to destroy people and ruin lives. And that's the kind of stuff you can find. Once you're aware of all this stuff, you can go out and find it everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I was looking specifically up in the mountains, and we went up to this beautiful lake on the backside of Rocky Mountain National Park. So it's 13,000 feet up, and it sits like this, and it's just a glacial lake, just pristine, beautiful. Everyone walks up there for their Instagram pictures, and they're like, yeah, it's so pretty. I'm so awesome. I hiked. And then there's this other area that's like way up there. And as you start to get to the top of it, there's all these boulders that are all sitting on 3 stones. Massive boulders, 20-ton, 30-ton things, and they're all aligned to the cardinal points. And I'm like, oh, this is it. And I was like, Chelsea, I'm like, they're calling to me. They're in there. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we can go into the underground right here. I'm like, this is where they live. They still live here. They're in that mine shaft. They're in that tunnel right there. She's like, I don't want to go in there, honey. I'm like, but I do. I want to go back to them. Like, I want to go back to them and tell them all these things I've learned and tell them all this stuff. But like, there's these openings and tunnels, and you have normal man-made new ones. And then you have the old ones that are sunk into the hillside and stuff like that. But you will find these together, these interlock, and you will start to, and then I started looking up Bigfoot sightings and started looking up and trying to corroborate how often are these things associated with this. If people just may not be aware of what they're looking at when they walk up to the top of a prominent peak and there's all this megalithic architecture. These are like old world religion sites. And these things built oftentimes their portals to the upper world to come out on those days, specific days, to meet with the mortals, the humans on the top surface, and they would give their daughters to them. This didn't stop after Genesis 6. This never stopped. You got to understand, people have been giving their daughters over to these other things for a long time, and it still happens to this day. And that's where, on one side of it, she didn't want me to go into it, and I'm okay with that now. But
today, you mean?
This was probably 8 years ago now. Okay. But bro, no, I still have a duty to be with my family. And I think as much as I love it, I understand that there's also a radical evil that's also often parasitically attached to this stuff. And you better be ready. You got to be on assignment. You don't just go up there because you want to. You go because you're called to. Those are two very different things.
I'm looking up here because based on what you're talking about and stuff. We live here. I mean, you do too. I just on the other side of the mountain, though, the Smoky Mountains. There's a guy who was here in studio. He lives here in Knoxville, and Jack, do you remember what he used to work as far like Jason's friend Andrew? He worked in what department? Do you remember? It was a DOD. Was it DOD? But he was talking about like black mass rituals that happened before, like rocket launches and things like that. And he's like, it's just a normal thing. But when he was, I guess he's still in, like, it was like one of those things. I was sitting down with somebody expecting an interview that I didn't totally get because he, like, before we started, he's like, there's certain things I'm not going to talk about. I'm like, that's what I want to talk to you about,
Super lame.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, since you're here, let's just hit record and see what happens. Anyway, it wasn't a bad show, but, he said that before he came here, somebody that he worked with, wherever he came from, I can't remember, said that, oh, you're going to the Knoxville area. That's where the Smoky Mountains are. He said he was told that there's a pyramid in the Smoky Mountains. And hearing you talk about high points and ancient ritual sites, being here in the mountains and megalithic structures, I wonder if we put a heavy dose of energy into searching the highest points of the Smoky Mountains, if we would start finding such things.
It would be very wise of you to look up what's called points of prominence. If you really want to endeavor to search this stuff out, you start looking up points of prominence. Okay, this is a technical term. So like you can use this for long range photography, stuff like that. But there's places where you can stand up somewhere very, very high. And every state, every county has a point of prominence. And it's real important if you're starting to understand, like, there's hotspot areas, right? And that's a clue in to there's stuff going on out there. There's something funky going on out there. You don't know who it is or what it is yet, but when you start to corroborate that 2 points of prominence, the two biggest things to look into is the high place and the low place, right? Death Valley is another one, right? That's where so much of my family, like, they go to the deserts and they run that operation because death literally lives out in Death Valley. Like, it's the largest national park in the United States. You would have never thought that. Death Valley National Park is the largest park in the United States. You're like, why? It's because it's not Death Valley out there. It's like the kingdom of death. And that's his territory and his turf. You better stay the heck out of here. And it's a real thing. Well, there's different territorial spirits, principality spirits, but it's not floating ethereal spirits. I'm talking about real physical assets that run these kingdoms. And that's their place of business that they run it from. That's their place that they operate from. So if you come in there, a lot of people stumble into it because they're a backpacker, a hiker, whatever, fisherman, guy who's willing to go hunt raccoons or bears, and they bump into this stuff. Well, what a lot of times they're bumping into is their guard dogs. They're bumping into the stuff that's designed to cause people fear. Like you know, one of the commonalities is this sick feeling of dread. Like, suddenly it's quiet all around. I mean, they set the stage so brilliantly. They set you up for a horror movie every time. And that feeling is something they can produce, right? That's a capacity that you can make people terrified. Once you learn how to do that to somebody, it's a powerful skill. And you can make people think you're absolutely wonderful or terrified all at once. It's a scary feeling, and a lot of people experience that. But the points of prominence are one of the most important areas that you can ever look at in any given area, because consistently people have utilized that space for this kind of stuff that we're talking about here. And on the other side of it, that's where a lot of them are coming to the surface. You know, like, I looked that up when I was in the Ozarks. I go to all of them. Like, that's where I was born. In Arizona, I was born on top of that hellhole. You know, like, it's a volcanic crater where they discovered Pluto. They have, here's a weird one. The United States Navy has one of the largest telescopes in the entire world. It's called the Naval Research Interferometer. It's a gigantic 3-track, multi-kilometer wide tracked telescopic systems for tracking objects very carefully, very precisely. It's for communicating with their guys. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But out there in Flagstaff, Arizona, it's high desert, low moisture content. So there's all these observatories out there. And so there's all these guys doing all this kind of telecommunications work out there. And so you start bumping into guys that are part of the military side, then you got guys that are part of the occult side, and it always has these mingling places on these high places. And that's what they did down at Mount Graham, you know, and that's why there's a particle accelerator below that one too, because they're trying to bridge these gaps between the fallen ones that are still beneath and the ones that they're trying to still convince to rebel above us.
That's still going on?
It's still going on. It's not all over,
Come
bro.
on, guys.
There's still a lot more coming down. There's still a whole lot more that are coming.
What do you mean?
It's not a third of them have not fallen. Big misunderstanding of context. It says the dragon sweeps a third of those stars down to the earth. The fallen ones come down with him. They wage that war. That's not a past tense story. People think that's always a past tense story. That's a big misinformation piece if you get that wrong. That's an assumption on your part that could destroy your family, you know? They can choose to rebel any given day, any of them. All of them.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if they rebelled at any given point of time's existence, it means it could happen again.
Absolutely.
That's something that it's interesting to bring that up because it's something I've been really focusing on personally, just in my own life, is the contemplations of time and eternity and existence of God outside of time, and how, you know, at the very instant of any creation, for as far as I understand, I don't want to say belief because it's not a belief system, but it's an understanding. As far as I can understand, it's hard to understand time, but as soon as God created anything, then everything was created because of time and him being outside of it, for him, I should say. So like the rebellion happened instantaneously when Adam was created. Well, actually, I think the rebellion happened. See, this is driving me nuts now. How does this work? So it's not, you're saying it's not past tense.
I'm saying I don't think the entire army of the fallen has rebelled. I think all the guys that are in his arsenal that are going to rebel are there. I think there's still an active, everyday opportunity for every one of them to choose to rebel. And I think that there's a lot more. Like, we think we're taking the best shot because there's 200 fallen angels that came down and did this campaign. Like, we're talking about many, many, many times that. I don't think any of us are dealing with that yet. You get what I'm saying? They terraformed the nations real fast when they came down. They're going to do it again. And it'll suddenly be very noticeable that all of a sudden this other world that people talk about is going to come forefront to the face of all of our minds. And they're going to masquerade as whatever version of gods and saviors and aliens they want to in order to advance their agenda, but they're not here yet. I do not believe we're taking the best shot from the dragon by any stretch of the imagination.
It's interesting because if you use the story of Job and how in several times in that story, Satan, because people think that, oh, Satan is in heaven. Like Satan would go and have communication with God. And he's like, where were you? And he's like, I was going to and fro.
Up and down inside the earth.
Up inside the earth, right. Thank you. And so it's interesting because if his presence in heaven at any given time resulted in a rebellion, who's to say it doesn't happen again or repeatedly?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so
if you're wanting to find these things, man, you got to track tunnels, you got to track springs and origins of waterways. That's the other stuff. Dude, if you really want to, man.
I'm gonna like
you could just take somebody out who's like this, and they'll just start coming out like.
Oh, I'm planning on it. You think you're going home tonight?
I knew it was a setup.
I am taking you, and I have a Nephilim blaster in my back pocket that you can't. I'll control you. So, yeah. All right. I don't know how we got on that part of it, but I think what you're saying is like when I was a kid, I was into this stuff. And then, you kind of phase out of it. And then I got married young and I was bored with my life. And I started watching Monster Quest on TV and I was like, oh, this is interesting. All this new feeling started coming back and I started going out looking for Bigfoot. And when I started doing that, I was like, this is going to be easy. Like, I was like, these people are seeing this thing. Like, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to go out there, crack this shell, call it a wrap, get famous for discovering Bigfoot. It's not going to be hard. It's hard. And, but that energy I haven't felt in a long time until just now. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's giving me some stuff here I can really start picking away at. And maybe I can find this thing and really do something fun here.
I'll just give you a super strong caveat here. As much as I tell you that, when I did, and bro, I've been in it, I went out trying to do it too. Because I had the same thought. I was like, you want to talk about a great documentary? How about when you really do it? Like, I'll show you guys. Yeah. So I was filming all this architecture and the tunnels and all this stuff, right? And we went on this big hike to try to get it because I'd been tracking this thing, like I'd been tracking a specific one. And it was not like it's near the Bigfoot Museum in Colorado, like an area, a hotbed area. And I just started
Bailey?
Yes.
Really?
It's outside that area. Yeah. So we went on some big hikes there in the national forest. In that area, there's a gigantic idol effigy of the Christ the Redeemer Catholic epicenter retreats. They're mountain place for the Lady of the Hills. And you go back from in there and it's a giant wilderness that is protected in a totally different way. And that's where I was like, we're going there, baby. We're going to go on this trip. And I brought my GoPro with like 8 different battery packs. And I'm like, oh, I'm ready for it. Redundancies.
Go ahead, redundancies. I got extras.
Bro. I'll do this all day. I knew what was going to happen. And man, bro, I'll tell you though, my wife had this, the night before it all went down, my wife had this wonderful word of wisdom to me. And I'll share that with you. And she said basically this, I think this is seductive for you. And that it's trying to lure you in and it wants to hold you there and keep you from the calling that the Father has for your life. And I was very convicted and I totally ignored her. And the next day was the consequences of that. And it almost cost her and I both our lives. And It was not a joke. And it was and I realized very quickly that these things I looked into the ET phenomenon, alien abduction phenomenon, all this stuff. I researched so much because I had a place where I was doing this red pill group where people could ask any question anytime we talk about anything. And I was researching like crazy to try to give them good answers. And I began to realize a common theme with all the cryptids and with a lot of the other stuff that people were touching into was that when you really seek it out, it'll kind of come to you, but it won't give you everything you want. It gives you teasers. And I'm like, that's a really effective tool to keep somebody coming back for more. And it was definitely distraction for me from what it was, the core of what I needed to be doing with my life. And that was a really good but really hard wake-up call for me about as much as I love investigating ancient technologies and lost civilizations and all this stuff. I understood at the end of the day that some of these things that I'm dealing with are evil. And some of us should have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather we should expose and reprove them, And so I had to learn a healthy balance about that. But I totally understand your zealousness, man, and your sense of adventure and all the rest of it. I love it. I love it. And it'll allow you the opportunity to get into nature in ways that most people never will. And that's great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I give you a big, giant cautionary warning that I think that some of this stuff, you better be really stinking careful and make sure that you're deeply rooted and grounded before you ever touch it.
So there are some things that I'm going to tell you after this, though. But I can tell you this. Me and my buddies that we do this with, we all feel a deep sense that we've been called to do these things.
Awesome.
So we're in a weird and unique situation where, and it also kind of stems from the podcast, really. But like, what's the underlying tone of the podcast? The podcast is here, I believe, to show the world that the supernatural realm exists. From that, people find salvation. From that, people wake up to the realization that things aren't what they seem. Maybe they don't find salvation, but they're woken up to things, and it's just this trickle down effect, domino effect. And part of that domino effect has been this documentary side of things, and it's adventures that I personally would go on anyways, but like Ward, who he has a company called Dark Holler Productions, and the whole reason why he has that is because he feels personally called to document this stuff, to show that this is real. And he comes from a very unique perspective because is it Presbyterian? Is that what Word is? Do you remember, Jack?
Honestly, I don't remember specifically.
But like Word's denomination is not really
into it.
Yeah. And so
very much not having it.
Right. And so the way Dark Holler Studios started was he has a docuseries called Dark Holler, and he has a friend that's a Baptist pastor who I was actually talking to earlier today. And he had called Ward up, and I might butcher the story a little bit, but he called Ward up and he's like, "Hey man, like I just did a baptism in the river in West Virginia." And he's like, "I think there was a simultaneous exorcism." And like Ward's like, "What? That's impossible," And so Ward goes down there and he's like, "I'm going to make a 15-minute video about this, whatever." He's a full-time camera guy, like cinematographer. I'm finding out that camera guy is...
They don't like that phrase.
Yeah.
Don't you dare call them that.
I apologize. Cinematographer. He actually used to work for Glenn Beck at the Blaze. Very skilled. And he goes down there and starts pulling at threads. And he's also an extremely smart person, analytical. And he starts pulling at threads, and it turns into a 6-episode docuseries where he's uncovering Lilith and all this stuff. And he's like, "What the heck?" And that's how he got linked up with me, because he called me. He's like, "Hey, I got this docuseries," and I'm like, and I talked to him on the phone for like 3 hours. And Ward's like a very like short with words kind of person, and he's probably like, "When's this guy going to shut up?" I'm like, "Tell me more about Dark Holler," But anyways, that's kind of like his calling, And same with Joel. Joel comes from his dad was a pastor, and he actually is a highly talented musician. And if you've heard any of my shows, he does all the outro music, and he dabbled in the dark arts, and he was pursuing that to gain power in the music industry. And he understood enough to know that in order to get to as high as you want to get to, you got to do bad things. And he thankfully didn't go far enough into that, and now like it's like his mission to show the world, yeah, this is real. This is very real. And so I'm uniquely in a position where I have guys around me who we all feel in our own way that our calling is to show the world this is real. And at the same time, it's fun. And so I just love being out there, and they do too. So, that said, I heed your warning Well, I'm not going to listen.
You don't have to. You don't have to take it as a warning, just a cautionary thing.
If I die,
what I'm saying?
There is an open seat here for somebody to take over the show.
I don't want your seat, bro.
Somebody else can take the reins on it. You know,
and carry on.
Yeah,
that's not really more as it's really that I ever even see like death involved. You know what I'm saying? It's just I agree that it's something that people can be called to, but I think for some it's just something that they can get caught up in because they don't have a good foundation. They get pulled away.
Yeah.
And they get led astray because they don't know what they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. They think it's just some animal thing that's bumping people in the night. And they have no idea what they're stepping into. They don't know how to deal with something like Lilith. They don't understand what the terror of the night really is. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's more what I'm saying. Not to you personally, more so to the guys that are like, this would be so fun. I got to flirt. Let's go, bros. Let's totally take a 24-pack and let's have a great time out there. Those guys,
I'll tell you, on that note, an example, I had a guy, Russell Acord, in studio here about a month or two ago, and he's on a TV show called Expedition Bigfoot. And he's like a flesh and blood guy. And we started talking about like dog man and things, and he's like, well, how would that exist out there? And I was like, well, you're assuming that it's a physical creature that always exists in this plane. And he's like, well, I just don't have evidence for this and stuff. And him and I kind of got into it, and I forget how it got into it. Like we weren't arguing, but we were discussing it. And I remember he was sitting in that chair, and he just kind of stared off in that direction. And he's just like, his elbows on the table. He's kind of like, and he's like, if I had more time to think about it, I think I could have a good answer to that. But right now I don't have an answer. But he's the guy that you're talking about. Like, you're like, just be careful, Yeah. But I've talked about this on the show before. We were charged by an invisible force out there. Joel and I had been on, we'll share that with the world. We have it documented. It was probably the scariest moment of my life out in the woods, because I don't believe that it's easy. Like, at least up until I met you, I don't believe it's easy. Now I'm thinking if I know the right signs, it might be a little easier. But I constantly go out there thinking that nothing's going to happen because I've been doing this long enough that nothing's happened. I'm like, well, the odds are greatly against me. And so I go out there and something very interdimensional happened. And it had Bigfoot sign with the smell and stuff like that, and the sounds. But then something ran up on us and we couldn't see it. We heard it. We caught it on audio. We caught it on video technically because the audio was running on the video. But I pulled my gun and I didn't see anything to shoot.
Yeah.
And then I do wonder sometimes if I would have shot.
What would happen?
Yeah, like if it was right there and I did shoot, would it bleed still? And that takes me back to the question that I asked you.
Carnal or not.
Can we kill them?
Yeah. Good question. It depends on what it is. I would say that first and foremost. It's hard to shoot a shadow. Really hard to shoot a shadow. And sometimes people with way better skill sets than you are projecting themselves somewhere else. There's dark arts, and some of those arts just involved sending spirit man over there to make people feel spooky. That's what goes back to those skinwalkers. Like that's what some of this is that people are running into. They're running into a witch and they just don't know it, and they're dealing with their demons.
That's interesting.
And so that's why I give the caution. It's not just, you're like me, man, I'm going to go. I want to know. You're like, I got to know. I'm not going to tell you no. But I just tell people, be careful, because unless you understand your authority, unless you understand covenant theology, unless you understand how to close the doors that you may have open to your life to the darkness, like, you can get your lunch eaten, son. And there's a lot of guys who've had that happen. A lot of people who ran out for their life. Like, there's a reason 7 guys tried to take on a guy who was demon possessed, and they ran away naked and wounded. That's one guy with some demons in him. Now you don't have, now imagine what a force can do with a town that lives up there, and they want to be left the heck alone. Well, they'll have their big, scary guard dog looking kind of things out there to make sure that people don't come near that. But if you're dealing with the physical side of that stuff, I do believe that 100% certainly you can kill these things. Like, I'll tell you right now, because it's a ridiculous story. I can't tell on any other podcast I'm going to ever go on. My dad was playing with one of these things. I'm going to tell you this. A dogman specifically, not werewolf. Lakewood, Colorado. Okay. Like I told you, he works in this super secret, crazy, not that secret place that any of you could figure out. Go digging, figure it out. Anyways, he goes on these runs. He's like a trail runner, right? It's a good cover when you just want to run into a military base or whatever. My dad's not military on the surface at all. No, there's no military-ish thing there. But he goes on these runs, trail runs, and he starts going on this path that's near a golf course. And Lakewood, Colorado, okay, so you have the Front Range, these massive 14,000 foot mountains, this wall, and then it's basically Kansas until you get to the Mississippi River. But Lakewood sits right near this area called Golden and Lakewood, and they're at the foothills. And so there's forest that still reaches from the city out into the mountains there. And there's some really beautiful trails that they've kind of built up. My dad is going on these trails, running back and forth, and he starts seeing these, you could call them offerings, just little collections of stuff that's being stacked up next to his running spot. And he starts messing with it, and he starts putting other stuff there, tearing it down, building something else up in its place. And he come back and it's built up again. This is in the forest side of it. And he starts playing with this thing back and forth and giving it stuff, how this goes. And he starts doing these little exchanges back and forth with this thing. The same time, on the dogman side of the YouTube world, there's another guy who's having all these sightings in Lakewood of this dogman that's jumping over fences and grabbing cats and doing all this other stuff and terrorizing this little neighborhood. And I hear this story, and my dad's telling me how he's playing with this thing out there, because they would catch these things. Like, once you learn that, like I'm explaining to you, that you can commune with these things, you can act like one of them, you can put your pheromones out to match theirs. Like, once you learn how to do this kind of stuff, you can attract them and you can bait them in and you can keep them, and that's what happens. People will try to trap them.
Keep them?
And trap them, like in a cage, and make them theirs. Do just like you would capture a wild dog.
You're saying that there's people that have caught dogman and keep them as theirs?
Absolutely. And then it's their breeding stock. And that's where some of these genetic experimentation things start from. That's where they're getting genetic samples. They have to have a breeding stock. That's where some of these Psy Warrior stuff and these other super soldier programs come from, is because they physically get the actual asset. But at the same time, I'm looking at that guy on YouTube, and my dad is telling me on the other side that he's playing with this dogman out there, that he's messing with this thing. And like, that's how you got one guy who's just YouTube guy out there trying to figure out what the heck's going on, because there's all these people that are having sightings out there. You can look this up on YouTube, the Lakewood Dogman. Like, and then there's other people who are occultists on the inside who are trying to capture these things and corral them and get them out of there. So it's a strange little world that's out there. It's a really fun one, but it's really bizarre.
Yeah, the Lakewood Dogman. I am going to mess with that a little bit. Okay, so I said 3:00. I have to
hard stop,
and so almost hard stop. Because I think my wife was texting me about getting food for the family too before I send the kid to the. Oh my goodness, my phone has been blowing up here. Looks like okay. Okay, apparently the app's not working for members. Can you look at that if you can? As far as the episode goes.
He's like, right now?
Lindsay said, I'm not, I would like to, I'm not getting today's episode on the app refreshed and uninstalled, reinstalled. Is it published? I can check later, but I'm still getting Gemma down. And then she said, it looks like it's published. So I don't know what the deal is. I had 2 other people email about it who can't get the new episode either. So while you were there doing other things, do that too. So, and that is the app he just logged into. You mentioned about again. That's like the cosmos saying, it's wrap out time. Let me just wrap this up with saying this. You mentioned about there being wolf breeding farms or something like that in Tennessee, out near the Fort Campbell area?
Michigan. Oh, you want to talk about that one, Fort Campbell, that area.
There's 2.
Well, my family's one was up in Michigan.
Okay.
All
right. So, but in general,
there's this other place. You ready? There's this other place that's outside of Fort Campbell, near the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. That's called Hunter's Field, and it was a air base, but in a field. So not towered, not known. And it's where special operations groups would be able to go in and out of to do different training exercises. And one of these field assets, a guy kind of like me, different background and story, but like me, lived there with dogs that were not dogs, wolves, like actual wolves, like not the dogmen, kind of just wolves. And they would run operations. And when I was in basic combat training, got taken from Fort Knox, Kentucky out to this middle of nowhere cornfield in near the Fort Campbell area, and it was Hunter's Field. And they would have a maze, a gauntlet that they would set up to do simulated training experiences, but they would release the wolves into it while you're running in this what you think is like another training house, kill house kind of scenario, and you got to rescue a hostage, or you got to take somebody out, or you got to extract somebody, and then there's suddenly stinking wolves in there.
You got to kill the wolves?
Heck no, bro. You make friends with the wolves. I love wolves, bro. Oh. It's like, to me, it's like coming home. It's like the pack I've been waiting my whole life to come back to, bro. I can talk. I can be like.
Are they released to kill you?
No, they have restraints. Like you train. You're on mission here, and they're training dogs at that point. You know,
Gotcha.
They're training wolves.
Gotcha.
You know, but they're teaching you. Like I was telling you earlier, you have to know how to handle fighting against animals and infiltrating around animals and dealing. It's a serious thing. If you've never had to deal with attack dogs, it's a horrifying nightmare when they come and bite somebody's balls off in front of your face, and you got to deal with that, you know, like that's the intro move that a lot of them do. And you're like, you got to be kidding me. So anyways, that's in Fort Campbell, but right next to it is the body farm for the University of Tennessee, where they do all their experimentations with corpses and with human bodies and all their coroner's reports and everything like that. So they'd be like, we want to figure out exactly how long this body's going to take to decompose given these situations. But this is all centered around this same little area. But it's the founders of the 160th SOAR Battalion, these guys who do all the special operations they fly crazy aircraft in and out of places covertly and put people to do the kind of covert operations work. But that's all based there in Fort Campbell. So that whole neck of the woods, man, is a big sketch zone. And all the guys that are up and around that area, it's a whole bunch of tier 1 operators and guys that are.
And I love the fact that it's so close to me, like, because it just confirms I live in the perfect area for what I do for a living. So last thing, real quick. I told you about the episode I did. It was a member episode. So people who are listening now have heard it, or you're a new member, go find it. I forget what I called it. 575. Why do I know that number? I think 575 is the episode. But Fort Campbell, I had a guy come on and say how, you know, he encountered Dogman on Fort Campbell in the back 40 where they train. He said it was a common thing. They would call out Dogman over the radio. And he wasn't on the scene, but he heard it over the radio where a dogman actually grabbed one of the guys, started pulling him into the brush, and they pulled the guy back. Are they releasing dogman on these properties to basically train the dogman on the soldiers, or train the soldiers on the dogman, or do they just so happen to exist on Fort Campbell?
I can't say specifically about Fort Campbell. Like, I think by and far the vast majority of time, like those are their what you would call sentinels. That's something that's specifically placed out there to guard areas and to make hardened targets. Now, you can use a sentinel as a training tool, you know, to train specific selected individuals on how to get by them or get around them or work with them. But I don't know who's training who in that scenario. Yeah. It's a bunch of liars. I don't trust anything I ever heard from those people about what the true story was, because the vast majority of everything they ever told me, I came to find out was a lie. So I don't put a lot of substance onto it. But more often than not, the way I've seen them deployed has been as sentinels predominantly, as guard dogs in that sense.
That's interesting. Because that episode, technically in the beginning of the planning of that, was supposed to be 4 witnesses coming on at one time, and they were going to come here in studio.
Wow.
And it trickled away, and so guys started ghosting and not responding, and I was down to one guy, and I was like, well, you still good? And he's like, oh, come on. I was like, cool, let's do it remotely. And we did, because he was, I think, in another state at the time, but he wasn't even stationed at Fort Campbell by then. But man, that would have been a legendary show. I mean, it was a good show, but it was legendary if I had 3 other soldiers who were there and they're all saying the same thing.
Wow.
And it was like a roundtable discussion of the Night of Terror with Dogman. Wild. That would have been wild. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. But listen, man, I do gotta run. It was good talking with you, hanging out with you, and I'll do it again if you want to do it again.
Oh yeah, man, all day.
Cool.
Love this.
I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Honestly though, the next time we have a conversation, I'm not even gonna know where to start. So I'm just gonna be like, just start talking, we'll figure it out. Because I have no idea.
It's been a real blast. Thanks so much for having me on.